He's 2 years old now.
All right, live stream's up. So,
Only get to see him like once a year.
well, I was gonna say, I didn't even have them before. Tell me about that. There was COVID. There's little drafts in there. Too much.
Yeah, I think that's where it's coming in at. That's where it's coming in at.
That was one thing though, too, is that you don't hear them talking, so. You can read it. I didn't read it. The table, stuff in it. They're legal pay.
Oh, this color balance is off. Like the colors are off.
Is it a Halloween thing? Feels like it up there. Live stream's on.
You find out Paul's gonna make it?
I will.
For your information, I don't expect this to be a long meeting. I don't know how long it'll run, but
You know, I almost made some up, but there is some coffee back there.
We've got ice water.
There you go. That
Thanks,
sounds
Wilson.
delightful. Let's go. Kudos to you. So many people talk about the things that they want to see us spend money on, and one shows up. Good for you.
The one that counts.
Yes.
There you go. Live stream is on, by the way.
Okay.
It has to-
So by all means, continue smack talking the rest of
If anybody else would like to come and join us at City Hall, it's nice and warm. There's no hot chocolate, but there is coffee
And ice water.
and ice water.
They'll see that on the live stream, they'll see the water.
And that was not smack talking, that was congratulating. There's a difference. You can't assume that they both go together.
It's gonna be nice weather for the citywide yard sales.
Yeah.
It'll be beautiful.
Oh, that's right, that's this weekend.
That's why I said the hunters are probably not gonna be happy because it's gonna be 80, but it'll be nice for all this.
We have about 9 spots left, that's all.
Nice.
That's good.
It's going to be a beautiful night for the Alsatian language class, the very first one tonight. Yeah.
Well, they'll learn to say home.
What's that?
They may learn to say home. Wet.
How do you say cold, wet, and dreary? They say Germany. What's that?
I just text Paul to see if he's on his way.
Okay.
You haven't heard from him, correct? Or have you?
No, I talked to him this morning, but we didn't talk about this.
Oh,
I assume that he's going to be here.
let's hope so. You gotta have him.
He is absolutely brilliant. He was showing me how to look up deeds, and there was a question about, there was one property that one person thought that they owned, and it was like right along Highway 90, but that piece had been taken out, like there was no piece left. It was just really interesting going through this and seeing the process that he goes through as a surveyor.
Paul?
Yeah. I was trying to find the history on ours, but there was one little, I think like 3 people ago, there was, it had gone through probate instead of through a deed. And so I gotta do more search on that. I just wanted to find the whole history of who owned my property and when.
My house up in Oklahoma had been in 2 different states, 4 different counties,
Wow.
3 different territories.
And it wasn't a mobile home.
No. No.
That was good, that was good.
What's going on?
Welcome back.
Hey.
Yay.
All right, you ready, Deborah? All right, we're going to call the meeting to order at 3 o'clock. We'll start with a roll call.
Shana Martinez, District 1.
I'll carry for District 2.
Phil King is absent but excused.
David Mers for District 4.
Herb Dyer, District 5.
And Derek Schroeder, Mayor. All right, next item is citizens' comments. Would anybody like to speak for citizens' comments? Oh, I take that back. I'm sorry. Please let the record reflect that Phil King is here. I was thinking you weren't going to make it.
That's what he told us.
I thought
Yeah.
you were going to be here.
Look at that.
Oh, no.
Do we have another copy of these? We'll share.
All right. Sorry for the interruption, please.
No, I'm just whenever y'all are ready, I'm fine.
Oh, thanks.
Kyle McVeigh, 307 Madrid, and I know y'all are going through what you're going to propose for improvements. Please, please consider doing the animal shelter this year. I mean, it's so needed. It's just, I can't tell you how many people call and have animals they need to find homes for and all this bit. And we can't do any of the fostering, adopting out like we should unless we had a facility. And I know there's volunteers, there's our group, there's Petunia's group, there's all kinds of people that will help with this. It's not going to be just a one-time deal. So please consider it. It was suggested that I reach out to our Commissioner, Mr. Sitter, or Commissioner Sitter, and to Mr. Lutz, the judge. I did, and I haven't had a response back. Sort of like how the city has. I know y'all reached out to them and the same type of thing. So please, give it some serious thought this time. This is the chance to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next item is review and discussion of FY22 32? Oh, through 32 CIP projects. That was not a typo. That was a misread by the mayor.
They are 10-year plans. All right, and you'll see there's not a lot of, I mean, that's all it says because we're going to go, we're literally going to do a review. As I've shared in multiple council meetings at this stage, you know, our outlook for issuing bonds is grim for this year. We originally planned to issue some debt. We're not going to do that. We thought we might be issuing general fund debt every 2 years. So we issued the first tranche. It's now, we should be issuing the next tranche, like next year to 2024. We're probably not going to do that. We should be issuing another tranche of utility fund debt, doing that every single year or whatever the best method is to get the best rate in the market. And that's part of what our financial advisor does. Sometimes he'll put 2 bond issuances together because you're going to get a better deal doing that than trying to do one every year, that kind of thing. Save on issuance costs and other things like that. But we're not going to do that either. And in fact, we talked about utility rate adjustment recently, and we're still in the works to bring you back a rate plan that we think reflects what you all shared with staff at the last council meeting. So primarily, this is going to talk about how we've used the bond proceeds so far, just an update, a high-level update on the projects and where they're at, and then a discussion of our cash fund balance and projects and some advice from me on how to look at spending money, that cash that you have, and again, basically just some general advice on how to think about how to spend that money. And then we're going to talk about different projects that money could be spent on, okay? So with that, we'll kick it off. So this is just a high level. We issued two different bond series. The series 2022, there was a total debt issuance of $9,285,000, and that was on January 1st of 2022. And it was divided up as follows: $4,650,000 for the general fund, and a total of, I can't do that math in my head, but basically $5 million in utility fund, right? $4 million.
Four and a half, a little over.
$635,000 in the utility fund. And you'll see these amounts later. And then we issued a 2023 series, again for the utility fund, and this was for $5 million. Now, if you're not familiar with bonds, when these bonds are issued, they're issued as certificates of obligation. The cities still have the right to issue bonds for certificates of obligation for certain things. However, depending on the type of project that's issued, now the great state of Texas has resolved that for certain projects, you would need to go to the voters and get them to actually vote on the bond. And some of that has to do with the amount, the size of the city, and other rules as such. So that's part of what kind of determines how much debt we issue and what we issue it for. And when you issue a bond, there is something called
And really quickly, was that a recent passing, or was that the stuff that we've already been dealing with? I'm not familiar with the
vote. I believe that was in this last legislative session. So that's an update. I know there was definitely proposed legislation on it, and I want to say that some of that passed because I know there's several cities that are undertaking the vote that they didn't like on their city hall buildings. I think specifically if you're to issue debt to get to do a city hall, I believe that you have to go take it to a vote. But again, that may or may not apply to us depending on the size of the community, right?
Sure.
So there's just more for general benefit of everyone present. The point is cities can't just do whatever they want. We have to, whatever we do is constricted by the laws regarding issuance of debt and the type of debt that's issued, right?
Cool.
So we issued these as certificates of obligation. They're not, it's a slightly different from a GO. A general obligation bond is voted on by the people. Certificates of obligation are not. So we didn't hold a vote. We just, you all held several public meetings where you discussed CIP, we issued the debt. And when you issue it, there's something called an official statement that accompanies those bonds. The official statement basically is the guarantee to the guarantors, the people who buy those bonds. You're telling them, here's what we're going to spend the money on. And you must spend the money on those projects. And you cannot, you don't have to necessarily spend it on all of them. So for instance, you could say, we're going to do streets and parks and this and that and that. And actually you only do streets, right? That's okay, you can do that. But if you say, we're going to do parks and streets and we'll say the PD facility, but then someone comes along and says, well, we want to build a new fire facility with that money, you could not use that money for a fire facility. So the point of that is just to share that when these bonds were issued, there were official statements made about how the funds would be issued that were in line with our CIP that we adopted at that time. And that also, so in addition to being restricted by the state and those legalities, we're also restricted by what we tell our bondholders we're going to use the money for. So again, just some general kind of setting the lanes as far as how bonds work. So we did that, we issued that debt, and we adopted a capital investment plan in 2022, which we then updated again in 2023. And what you're looking at, this is available online. We have a flip book. Our staff invested in Flipbook, and that has allowed us to turn the budget and the CIP and several other documents, the Parks Master Plan, and the other master planning documents into Flipbooks. It makes it kind of, feels like you're reading a magazine online. This is out there if you look for CIP or Capital Investment Plan. You should find it both ways on our website. It will take you to our finance page where these things are available. So I'm not going to drill down into, because this is kind of hard to read and I recognize that. We break this down into updates here in a second, but this is kind of what that looks like. And it starts out with just how it's organized. The utilities are first in the document. The big bold areas, we have utility administration, and then And things like the AMI project, the automated meter project, would fall in utilities administration because it's really a part of all the utilities. So there's things like that. Impact fees that cover all the utilities would fall in that category. And then there's wastewater projects. And then water projects, and each area has a subtotal. You'll see those subtotals in bold on the bottom of each section. And then electrical projects and gas projects. And so then that, and a drainage utility. So that's a utility we kind of forget about because it sits out there. It's not something that people see or think about very often, but there is something that all of us pay for on our utility bills. We pay $5 a month, and that actually goes to the drainage utility. So the drainage, there is a utility the city established. It has a fee associated with it, just like our other utilities. And it was established over 20 years ago in order to help pay for the bonds that made the improvements on Garcia Creek and along Washington and a couple other places in town. So that utility still exists. So then that's all the utilities, and you'll see a total utilities line in that blue, towards the middle of the page. And then the general fund projects begin, and it starts with facilities and planning. Something else I'm going to note when you're looking at this document, another way to read it is to look at the color-coded portions. Each of these color codes in the document it's denoting two things. One is denoting whether or not the project is funded. So if it's got a color, it's shaded in, then it's a funded project. If it doesn't have any shading, then it is unfunded, and it'll actually say under funding, unfunded, right? Where it gets a little... Go ahead.
Go back to the last slide that you're on. Okay.
So I'm going to give an example. If you look at this annual water line replacement program, it's a area in gray. You'll see that part of it's shaded and part of it isn't. The part that's shaded is funded. The part that is not shaded is not funded. So that's kind of how to read the document and look at it and kind of tell at a glance that whether something's funded or unfunded. But then you'll also notice that there's different colors. And the different colors in the CIP, and again, I'm sharing some of this for the benefit of our listening audience and those that are here. I know that you all were part of creating the CIP, but this is also a helpful reminder. The colors actually mean something as well. So that orangish, peach, whatever color you see that airport plant to be colored, that is private funding. That's the color that private funding gets. And we put that in the CIP in part to recognize that the city is not the only one making these investments, that we have partners in the community that help us with these investments. And some of those partners are state, federal, and local like businesses and developers. So as an example, the gray right below that, kind of it's a little hard to see on this, at least on my screen, but the one that's colored in a light gray, that means that that's bond funded. So the bonds that we issue will go to help paying for that. And then below that, there's another color. It looks kind of a light blue or blue color. That means that it's being funded with some type of grant or federal money or state money. In this case, that it says DWSRF, that stands for Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So at one point in time, the city, that's actually not a grant per se. It is a low-interest loan program that is operated by the Texas Water Development Board, the TWDB. So there's a couple acronyms for it, TWDB, DWSRF. They administer those funds. The city went out and borrowed basically funds, and we maintain accounts of those funds, and some of those funds remain unspent. And we have what's called Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, and that's for what you would expect. It's drinking water. It's for water projects. And then there's what they call Clean Water State Revolving Fund, CWSRF. Clean water is not as intuitive. It actually means wastewater. So it's I don't know why they call it CWSRF, I do not know, but they call it clean water, but clean water actually refers to dirty water, to sewer projects. So we have some funds remaining in both of those accounts. In the DWSRF fund account, we have $321,000 that's unspent, that was borrowed for specific water projects back in the day, expanding over, I'm going to say 20 years. We have these accounts on our books that have different amounts that we received but didn't spend. And so we're working with the state agency to get those funds released and utilized for projects that we can use them for now. So that's what that is. And then you have like county co-op.
So
What
how does that work? Back that up for a second.
Mhm.
How does that work with having those funds released for other projects? Can you?
Well, it's tedious, is how that works. We have to convince that controller to close out, that we have to prove that all those projects actually were closed. They really shouldn't be, those amounts shouldn't be there. We should have already used them, frankly, but we have like I said, we probably have, between the DWS and CWS, between those two funding groups, we have at least a dozen accounts of projects that just didn't get fully closed out. So you have to go through a paper trail with the agency, the state agency, to show that, yes, this project was closed out and it did what we said we were going to do, and there's this remaining balance. And now we have to prove, once he says, yeah, okay, you're right, you have that remaining balance, and we say, okay, can we use that for, one, I think the way it actually gets released, technically, once they release those funds, you have extra funds, I think they honestly just kind of become yours. They just go into the utility general fund, right, in that fund balance. What we are doing as an extra precaution is tracking those funds and then applying them to the same type of project they would have applied to. So if anybody ever comes back in the future, we can say, nope, drinking water is used for a drinking water project, and here's the proof, and so forth. And the good news is we have plenty of, good and bad news is we have plenty of projects. We don't have to go find something to use them on. We have plenty of stuff to spend that money on. So that's, I don't know if that answered your question technically, but it's tedious, and God bless Leroy for working with David, what's his name, over at Texas Water Development Board to get that done. But that's been a work in progress for a year, probably a year, almost. And we're still not there. But that's what those are. And then we have like county co-op, that's colored the same shade because, once again, this is what we view as a state or local agency or a grant. And they are doing in-kind labor. A good example of this is,
Alsa Street? and
Amelia?
Peterson.
Oh, Alsace.
Or, Petersburg.
Yeah, what was the other one I told you?
Peterson.
Right down River Road.
Algiers?
Also did
Amelia.
River Road off
Amelia.
Mexico.
It was Amelia. I was like, it's an A, and I haven't heard it yet. It is Amelia. They did I say Amelia because that's the most noticeable. It's a long section. But they did do those other sections near the elementary school, and in those cases, we're just paying for material, and they do all the work and all the labor, and they fix our street. And that's part of, it really is, I don't want to say anything negative at all because Larry's been a fantastic partner in doing this. But the fact of the matter is that we as taxpayers in this district pay extra money above and beyond the county tax. So we pay a county road tax, and then we pay a special District 2 road tax. So we pay a little bit extra. And so yeah, I think the argument made, we deserve a little extra attention. But either way, he's not obligated to do these things, technically. And we really appreciate his support.
He has
And
been doing
the
that.
partnership that Devin has built with the county has been fantastic. So I can't say enough about the county helping us do those projects, and we intend to continue that effort. So that's what that is. Then you'll see something in tan. The tan denotes cash reserve use. That's a cash reserve use of the utility fund. So in certain instances, we say, you know what, this is something that needs to be done because it is either something that's not very expensive or is something that's not very durable, meaning that it's not something that would be likely to be put on the books as a capital expenditure. Or if it were, it's like a minor capital expenditure, like computers sometimes get capitalized, but they get replaced on a 5-year schedule. That's the type of stuff you don't want to tie 20-year debt to. So for that purpose, we use our cash. So that's what that color code denotes. And then you'll see as we get in the general fund, we change the color slightly just to differentiate between utility fund and general fund. So now we have a bunch of other colors, but they're going to mean some of the similar things. In the general fund side, if it's this kind of turquoise, and now it's not light blue anymore, it's kind of a greenish blue, that denotes bond money that will be used for that purpose. And you have, again, the grant money, that is still the same color. That's a blue color. Unfunded, of course, is still white. Where you had a light tan in the utility fund for denoting that cash was being used. Here it's a little bit darker brown color, means the same thing. It means that general fund is going to spend its cash on that particular item or project. And then down at the bottom of this document, everything gets totaled up. So we had totals in the utility fund for each utility down below, so you could kind of easily follow how much each utility was spending, gas, water, wastewater. But then down below, we have it broken out by uses of cash for the general fund, use the new bonds, how much we've got allocated for each of the new bonds. And then we have a total for the entire general fund. Here's what the total spend for the general fund is. And then the total general fund unfunded. So here's the amount of obligations we've recognized. These are projects that we recognize need to be done, but we haven't allocated funds for. There's not funds to allocate for. And then below that, you have utility fund reserves. So that, again, that's utility funds cash reserves are being used. They're new bonds, the bonds that we've issued, and then a total for the utility funds. And again, you can see those totals by water, wastewater, et cetera, up above. Those are embedded in the document. And then below that, your total utility fund unfunded. And you can see out to the right, it's a little bit, just so you know, I mean, it's a little misleading because someone could draw the conclusion that looking at the utility fund, oh, well, there's only $50 million worth of projects out there that we need to fund to do, and that's not the case. That's simply, this is just projects we've recognized that are kind of prioritized. If we tried to recognize all of the unfunded utility fund projects, I feel fairly confident that if you were to look over a 10-year horizon, it would be $150 million. It would be a lot of money. But we haven't done that because it would be futile. We know that we don't have $150 million. So that's something else to just note as you look at this document. All right. Again, I said we weren't going to dig into this. This is available on the website if you want to blow it up and look at it and really study it. But
When is this going to get updated though? Because I've seen at least 2 or 3 items,
all the time.
probably more. That
Well, there's two things. Okay, so number one, the document itself is being updated right now as we work on this CIP. Like we're going to do this workshop, and then we're going to talk about how we're going to spend money, and then we'll bring you a new document that will be updated, and the statuses will be updated, and the funding amounts will be updated, and that kind of thing. What we purposely aren't updating the online version because it'd be like updating your budget as you spend money. Yeah, it was adopted the way it was adopted. And plans, we know, they're adopted plans are never executed exactly the way they're adopted. That's just a fact of life. So it's meant to be a reference document, not necessarily reflect truth.
Except it should be updated probably once a year, like right now.
Right, and then it becomes a new plan.
Yep.
We had the FY22, then the 23, then the 24, right? So we're going to do that, and we'll probably have that, I would think, in January, when we've done it typically in the past. There'll be some back and forth between us and council on these projects. And probably January timeframe we'll be ready. That said, you all have invested in a separate program for the balanced scorecard. And we, as a group, decided to utilize the CIP as the first kind of project with that balanced scorecard to see how it functions and works. I've been told that'll be ready mid-November. So the original date was to be done, I think, September 1st. So it has been pushed some, mainly because we are pushing ClearPoint. That's the software company. We are really pushing them to develop a better software than what they had originally, they've done a lot of internal changes at our request, which apparently, that's one of the reasons why they're a good company, is that they're willing to actually, we aren't having to pay any extra, and we're saying, you know what, it would be really good if the software did this. And so they're going in and making those changes, and they're utilizing our consultant, Your Biz Rules, to do that. So they're very, very close. All of our information's in there, and right now at this stage, we're really just waiting on ClearPoint to catch up. So that'll be ready probably mid-November for us all to look at together. And that's the caveat to the reporting. So you all at council are going to get the benefit, and we'll talk about, as we utilize ClearPoint, how much of that gets put out to the public and whether that kind of replaces what we have on the CIP, or what types of reports we want to make publicly available. But that's all the decisions that you're going to be able to make as we explore ClearPoint together. So that's the caveat I'm going to give about the CIP, because I think the reporting on it is going to get a whole lot more granular and better based on the usage of ClearPoint. So you'll get real-time updates on, for instance, AMI. what percentage is complete, but how, like, you'll be able to dig in and get better data than what this is. So this is just, we're just gonna go kind of down the row and talk about the projects that are in the CIP. It's in kind of reverse order. In fact, it's not in any order that I could tell. Sorry, Leroy. It doesn't really follow along, so don't try to follow the CIP document and check these off, because it doesn't really do that. But these are the projects that are funded in the CIP. And just to kind of go over the general fund projects, and then we're going to the utility fund projects. So, and this is also partly a reminder to kind of celebrate what we've actually accomplished over the last 2 years. We have got quite a number of things done. So at the library, we installed that kiosk, we did the drive-through and the awning extension, and then right now we're doing inside renovations. All the ceiling tiles are being replaced. They improved their kitchen, did some other things. Those projects are finished. The public safety building, roof repairs were completed. The city hall renovations, we're in process, but some of those things, as you know, have already happened. One of the real problems with city hall was that the roof was leaking and causing additional wear. That's been fixed, and then fixed again, and then fixed again. I guess that's how that works. Our animal services building, it got new air conditioning. It's a number of other improvements have been made at that site, and those are done. For emergency management, we talked about buying equipment. That really hasn't, we haven't identified how to utilize those funds, but we have some funds earmarked for emergency management. Downtown master plan, that's in process. That's part of the Simple City award that we just did. So that'll actually probably be on the tail end of what they do. So we've signed a contract to do the downtown master plan, but they're going to start with the UDO. Actually, going to start with the master plan and then work into the UDO. And then I think the tail end will be the downtown master plan. GIS system, that's ongoing. We made an initial investment. We didn't know how much it was cost. There were fears it might be hundreds of thousands of dollars. It ended up being about $25,000 to get our GIS system up and going. But as requests have come along, hey, we want to see the airport. Hey, we need to add our gas system. Hey, we want to see this layer, stop sign layer. There's different layers we've added over time, and each time we do that, there's a small fee to have that added. So we spent, you'll see in a minute how much we spent on that, but it's about $38,000 as I recall. Then we have the northern route. That's ongoing. That's the city is partnering with the county, paying half of the cost to engineer the northern route. That's at a cost of about $850,000 or $900,000. We're picking up the bill for half of that. We have spent most of those funds. Again, I'll show you the expenditures here in just a minute. And the UDO, I just mentioned that's Simple City, so that's in process. Lions Park, we completed new restrooms, new splash pad, some trail upgrades and other, lots of trees and irrigation. Regional Park is the projects we had identified there are finished. New restrooms, parking, replacing playground equipment. The Regional Park Community Center is in process. That's at $2.2 million. Now the grant portion of that's 1.7. The city in the CIP earmarked $450,000 of bond money for the community center. So that's how that money will be spent. September Square, we installed landscape lighting and irrigation, so that's been done. Street overlay and maintenance, we are still ongoing,
Irrigation repairs to soccer fields in September
Yeah, in September Square.
Well, thank goodness, because those soccer fields in September Square were.
Oh, I don't
Where's
know
that
why.
hiding at?
Sorry.
You have fun doing that.
Oh, yeah, I didn't catch soccer fields.
Nineties the goal, cop on one end.
Well, they're little elf-sized soccer fields.
Street overlay maintenance and street replacement, both of those are in a way completed, but ongoing, right? We've made some investments in our overlay and maintenance ability. We bought a trailer and a truck and some equipment, a skid steer, yeah, that allowed us to do some stuff there. And then of course street replacement. I've got the percentage highlighted because I think there's two different ways to look at it. The way that we're looking at right now is in square yards. I prefer to do like linear miles because I think it tells probably a better story. But if you look at
We
it
do
as,
both, honestly, because
Yeah.
if you look at linear miles is the impact to the citizens, basically, like how the distance, but in terms of budget, the.
Square yards
square
is-
yards. Yeah, I think it's good to provide it both ways.
yeah. So I think we'd be slightly better off if we did linear feet or linear miles. But either way, it's a little over, did you add up the percentages from the emails earlier, by any chance?
I didn't get a clear
It's
answer. I
probably
understand.
12 or 13% of the total streets, or maybe higher than that.
The county ones weren't included as a percentage, so I didn't
Yeah.
add them all up.
Yeah, well, if Amelia, that was a pretty long stretch. I mean, this is about the same size as Berlin's, whatever that project was. But anyway, that is ongoing. One of the things that's hampering us on street replacement is simply not wanting to replace the streets when we know that there are water or sewer projects underneath that need to be addressed. So it's about timing those funds so that we don't have to go back and do work. And one of the things we'll probably talk about when we get to how we're going to spend our cash is talking about streets going forward. How do we maintain the momentum in the streets, given that we don't have any significant bond funds to be able to go use immediately, right?
And when you say percentage of streets, what year did that start?
We did a small amount in '21, as you're aware. There was a small '21 project, but the real effort started in 2022. And between 2022 and 2023, like I said, I think we did somewhere around 7% of the streets each of those years.
Did that include, when did River Road get done? I thought that was like 3 years ago.
I don't know. That was before my time. You're talking
No,
about,
the county did it.
Yeah.
County is, but it was a county road when we paid. for
Right.
materials.
Like River Road.
when do you think?
Yeah, to Mexico Street.
Mexico
2018?
Street, when it goes down and skirts along the
They were-
river.
they
It was before me, but
River Road.
Deborah thinks maybe 2018.
I thought it was since then.
Were you here, Devin?
Yeah, that's
19. And you were here?
Is that a city
Okay.
street?
That's
Well,
City Street
from-
all the way up to Grant.
From the time you reach,
Grant is the first property.
Oh,
Yeah.
that makes sense, because that's right, they own all the way, the people own all the way to the.
right,
river.
River Bluff goes to the river.
Yeah,
There's some discussion, anyway, I don't want to get, we could go off on a rabbit trail about who owns that street. I don't know.
It's only been there since 1850s.
What's that?
It's only been there since 1850s.
Right, right.
Well, he says, he mapped out easements on those streets, so they belong to, at least the city portion belongs to the city.
That's not good.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, I didn't want to go there.
But, so when you are gonna give us percentages, I guess I'm curious when to start, whenever you do that.
It'll probably be by year, and I had planned to just do it in conjunction with the CIP, which would be 22, 23, 24, because our first adopted CIP was 2022. But I'll do it whatever timeframe you want me to.
So you'll say like in '23, we did 17%, in
Right.
'22, we did 5%.
Right.
Like that. Okay.
Yep, that's
Wish
it.
we did 17%, 23.
Yeah, you know, awesome.
You know, it's interesting, like, I'm just a quick aside on the streets. I've been asked the question, why, well, only 10% a year, why do you only do 10% a year? On the other side, when you do large sections of it, people are like, oh my gosh! So it's incredibly disruptive to do large amounts. So there's this balance between the two. And I think that you've ridden that balance really, really well.
Why can't we do it without, you know, why
Flying
can't we
cars,
do it with
man.
drones or
Flying
something? Something
cars.
that doesn't
Yes.
provide any, yeah, it's just, yeah, it's always messy when you actually start doing work. So then we have the vehicle and equipment replacement. There's a separate sheet in the CIP that actually just deals with vehicle and equipment, and you can see that online as well. And that is both completed and in process simply because some of those items aren't due to be funded. They're funded, you've set aside the money for them, and they're in that funded category, but they're not due to be replaced until 2024, that sort of thing. So, but we have made a lot of investments in various vehicles and equipment.
So in the vehicle replacement, vehicle and equipment replacement, those are the items that you're putting, the details of those items are going into ClearPoint.
That's correct.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so one of the things that ClearPoint will provide to you all as policymakers is you'll be able to see, it has the ability to report, well, how many miles does that vehicle have, what condition it's in, how much have you spent on maintenance. To the degree that we have those records and are able to put them in as staff, we have the places to put all that information. So going forward, you'll be able to see all that.
And so for council, these are things that we regularly use, regularly replace, so we'll have the opportunity to there's kind of a rough standard, replacement standard and we'll go through and refine that and say very specifically, this is the standard, and it will just kind of propagate itself. And as the city grows, if we need to make modifications to that, you'll have the opportunity to do that. But it also shows where we are in progress, if there's any high volume years for replacement coming up that we're not prepared for. So I'm glad that you're getting that in there.
So then, that was general fund. These are utility fund projects. Again, there's been a lot. It really starts, when you start to look at everything we've done, it's just, you start to appreciate how many projects are going on right now. But the smart meter program, that's in process. The water and wastewater impact fee analysis was completed as part of, well, yeah, that was completed. Vehicle equipment replacement, again, that's in process. Water and wastewater master planning. You all saw that. It says 90% completed, but I think it's pretty much done, right? The master plan, so I don't know why it's, that's, you know, an example, Mayor, of kind of like living document versus one that's only updated periodically. TCQ ponds, wastewater, we've got the preliminary design complete, the final design is in process, and I believe it's going to be delivered to the council before the end of the year. We have CCTV cleaning. We have expended all the money that was approved in the CIP for CCTV. I put in process because we know that this is something that needs to continue, and we'll have to determine whether we're going to be able to continue to fund that or not. But it's certainly, so a portion of the portions that we had allocated are completed. Regional lift park, so we have two different lift station projects. We have a regional park lift station. The engineering on that has been completed. And then the Country Village lift station repairs, the engineering on that's been completed. And we're looking at taking that one out to get it to actually have work done. The regional park one, because there's not enough money to do that project, that'll probably wait for a future when there's money available. And it's also
Upgrade is the regional park lift station?
What upgrades are there? To enlarge it primarily. It'll also modernize it. I think we're going to put in additional pumps for redundancy and that kind of thing. But that's, well, when talking to our engineers, again, they help us prioritize these projects and determine which ones we should do in which order. And the consensus was the Country Village needs to be done before Regional Park. So that's the order that we're going to try and do in that. They really both need to be done. But sometimes you gotta pick the favorite. Sewer collection lines, again, that's in process. We just did a water line project on.
We completed the ones for this year.
Yeah.
What?
We completed the ones for this year.
Yeah. And then the water line replacement, same thing. I have in process here simply because there's some of these projects that are at the tail end of wrapping up, and we have additional monies that will be allocated. One of the things that we went out for was a CDBG grant for a portion of the water line over on Washington and like Athens area. That's right. So those are in process. SCADA, also in process. So one of the major improvements we did with the Alsatian.
Back up 1 second.
Yeah.
When you say West Castroville, what are we talking about? West of the old city or west, south and north?
Old City.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have one call.
Do what?
What do you want to call it?
Oh, as long as you tell me what it is, I'm
Yeah,
happy.
You know, I think the better way, so we're going over this, we've talked about this before, and I know that we have time limitations, resource limitations, but all of these, they're very nondescript. Like, when I look at things like the street repair, the images that I've been sharing with you in terms of, like, I think those images show a much better understanding and talking about in process, what's completed, what's not completed. So going forward, I just, and I know that we'll work through.
That's what this clear point's for. That's what I'm saying. This is not gonna change. The CIP document itself, it'll be interesting to see how ClearPoint gets utilized, because we built ClearPoint to be able to do the same functions as the CIP document we have now.
But ClearPoint won't show me a map of what streets have been done and what street won't.
We have worksheets, project sheets, Sunday sheets, and
I'm sorry, said that?
we have worksheets, project sheets with each of these.
Okay.
And it shows all those.
I think that, and my point with this is that the best thing that we can do is to listen to the people that we represent and to do the things that they're asking us to do and to demonstrate the fact that we've done the things that they've asked us to do. And to the last part, I just want to make sure that we're developing these tools to visually represent what we've done. If people can actually see it in terms that they can understand, like.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think that ability, to the extent that the ability
I think
exists.
you overestimate what ClearPoint will do.
Right.
Because there's additional things that we need to do.
Well,
We just need to work through what that looks like to properly demonstrate that the things that have actually been done. City staff has done an amazing job of getting these things done, but to be able to demonstrate that, to show somebody without being so, I call it nebulous, so imprecise. And I only say this based on the feedback of what I've talked to people and what they've said back. It's just very hard to demonstrate this. So I think
Well,
we
we'll
need-
bring up a project sheet, and we can talk about that in a minute, and
Okay.
see what if the project, because to John's point, each of these CIP items have project sheets go with them that talk about specifically, here's the water line that's going to be replaced, here's the technology that's going to be used to replace it, here's what it looks like. There's that level of detail, and ClearPoint is being developed to be able to do the exact same thing with pictures and like create a project sheet just like the project sheet we created in Excel that went with this CIP adoption. But to your point, like showing that it was actually done and showing it on a map, that map feature would be at the front end of the project to show this is where it's going to be done, this is what's going to be done. And then when you showed it was complete, you would just show the same image again, ideally.
And it becomes cumulative. I'm sorry, Herb had a question or a comment?
I just think that in the status column, the word "in process" doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
I'd like to see a percentage
Yeah,
complete.
and that's what you'll see with ClearPoint. Yeah, that's why I'm saying this is intended just as a workshop update for you all, but I understand that there's going to be, and hopefully you understand, there's going to be a better report with ClearPoint that will actually give you percentage completion, it'll give you the amount spent, it'll show you the budget, it'll show you is it under budget or over budget, and some of that I have coming up after these updates. But you'll be able to get a whole lot more detail out of that than you do out of this. And it's about not doing double effort, I guess. Okay, we did annual water lines. SCADA, one of the great things about the, what are we calling that? Medina Valley well site that Alsatian Oaks funded was it gave us an opportunity to implement a new SCADA system, which we then are pulling into our other areas, water, wastewater, lift stations, that kind of thing. There is a plan on the CIP for a water line extension up 471. It's not started yet, and honestly, I have to double check and see if that was actually funded, if we had an amount allocated for that. So I'll double check that. Lafayette Water, of course, that's done. The wastewater, the water master plan, phase 2 water. This is the elevated tank. That's in process. We're basically at, I don't know, 80% engineered, I would expect. And then River Bluff improvements, these are electrical improvements, those are in process. Impact fee and master plan for drainage. That's really kind of misnamed because there wasn't an impact fee analysis that went with that. It really was just a drainage master plan. That's completed. And then drainage improvements, those are not yet started, and they rely on a future bond issuance that we're going to talk about today. Whether we're going to issue that bond and what we would do with it. So then here's just a look at the financials. So we just looked at kind of just a generic status update on the projects. Here's what it looks like in financial terms. So for the library, we'd originally budgeted 87,000. We've spent 51. There's a balance of 36. Some of that 36 is going to be used to design expansions at the existing facility. I have 3-phase kind of expansions, whether they'll be done in 3 phases or 1 or whatever, we'll have to determine, we'll have to decide, but I'm having that designed right now with RESPEC is helping me get that done. But it basically would look at expanding the library to the west, to the south, and to the north. So where the existing entrance is to the left, there's a grassy area that's on a little bit of a slope. We could extend the library out that direction by about 12 feet, 15 feet. To the west, you can go towards the parking lot by about the same distance. And then to the south, you would have to change the roof line, but you could do something similar to what was done to the front of the building and add a section going to the south if needed. And I see that as like phase 3. Phase 1 and 2 would be to the west and to the north. City Hall renovations, this is really just the amount that, it shows 28,000, but I think actually the budget amount was 13.5. I'll have to double check. But either way, that was just the roof repairs and some of the very minor improvements that have been made. You also approved separately from the CIP $80,000 to have all of the engineering work done to prepare this project to go out to bid. And so that's what's in process right now. But it was not part of the CIP. It's being done kind of off book, if you want to consider it that way. Because again, that wasn't part of the bonded funds issued. And we've kind of done that separately. The animal control building, we talked about that earlier. We spent slightly more than was allocated. It was originally just under $31,000. We spent a little over $32,000. The downtown master plan, that's just started. Its original budget was $250,000. And then the Unified Development Ordinance, I'm skipping a couple lines. Its original budget was $225,000. That's been increased to $250,000 because the total contract amount for that project is $500,000. And we talked about that when we issued that there was some money we had enough money in the CIP that was not allocated yet, and so we allocated it to that. There's the GIS system. I think I told you 38. That's what was budgeted. We spent about 46, so we're almost $8,500 over. And I expect this GIS system updates will probably move off of the CIP. The initial project was to get it started. On an ongoing basis, there'll just be GIS expenditures in the same way that we have engineering expenditures every year, that kind of thing. So we probably won't track the GIS. It's that project I consider completed.
So then we'll track that through general fund for general street
Operation
stuff,
maintenance.
and then utility fund for utility stuff, and then airport fund for airport stuff.
Right.
So each department has their own updates.
To the extent that they have GIS expenditures, we can allocate it to each of those areas, as you stated.
That animal control, that's when we air condition them and spray
Yes.
foam. That'll happen this year? I thought that was last year.
This is covering 22, 23, and 24.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is just to show you how much we spent over that same,
Since 23.
yeah, since 22.
22.
Lions Park, we had a budget of 406, we spent 427. And we knew, as we completed Lions Park, that we had some money in Regional Park that we had not spent yet, so that's kind of where that money came from, and you can see that in the line below. We had budgeted $430,000 in Regional Park, we spent 417, so we had about 12,000 left. So there's about an $8,000 gap between Lions and Regional. And then we have the Regional Park Community Center. There's $450,000, as I mentioned earlier, that's budgeted for that project. That'll be what helps make up the 2.2 that we need to build that building. And then this is kind of the final page of the general fund projects, and we'll move on to utility fund. General fund, September Square, we had $35,000 allocated. We haven't spent any of that yet. Street replacement, we have 1.8 million, a little over 1.8 budgeted. We've spent 1.6. There's still about $300,000 or so that's not spent. And then vehicle equipment replacement, we have 332 budgeted. We spent 223, so we've got a little bit more money.
On the street replacement, and I was going to ask this earlier because we showed completed. When I talked to you, you said they have to come back and do some fixing on streets, so is it technically not completed? And they have to pick up all the asphalt they broke up and everything?
Yeah, so the rock that's there, that's on the Best property is not from the street project, it's from the utility project. So I was able to confirm that after our council meeting.
Okay.
As far as what's left and remaining, I don't know, is it completely closed out, the street project?
Vehicle walkthrough,
Yeah.
we haven't given them, we have 10% of the project still held.
Yeah, so 90% completion, 90% completion is probably more accurate, but we're at the final walkthrough stage, so barring any major fines, we'll release the 10% and close out the project.
Do we know why they didn't do that little section on Geneva, at the intersection of Geneva and Washington, up to the bridge?
Yeah.
And, because they did the other side, but they didn't do that portion.
Between Geneva and
Between
Washington.
Washington-
The
And the
intersection
bridge.
of Geneva and Washington and the bridge.
Uh-huh.
They didn't do that
Okay,
at all.
okay.
It wasn't identified in the original.
Project scope.
The other side of the bridge,
Yeah.
that is all part of Geneva.
It's about a 100-foot section,
150.
100.
Yeah, all I can say is it wasn't in the original project scope.
We had Geneva.
I just tell you, it wasn't in the original project scope. So there are certain things, there are a couple of things that we'll probably talk about when we have Kay Freeze come and present on our standard, because one of the things I know that the mayor requested is that we look at our street standard going forward. What does it look like? How do we know success when we see it? Maybe do it at the level of, a descriptive level for the layman to be able to understand, here's what a full street replacement looks like, here's how we do it, et cetera, a cross-section. But we can also, at that time, talk about this particular street project and some of the miscues that took place, because there were a couple of them.
Yeah, because it was just odd. I mean, we did from 90 all the way to Washington, skipped over the part on Geneva going to the bridge, and then immediately after the bridge, we picked up.
It's
So,
like
Yeah, it's not very long. I understand.
I don't know why that was meant.
I drove that intersection. The only thing I can say is it wasn't in the original scope, is what I'm hearing, right?
Well, the bridge, they avoided that for a reason.
Right.
And then, I believe, and I don't know if John, if you remember, there was a utility concern where there's some failure there, but I don't remember specifically why they had a reason.
Yeah.
Because if you go there, you can sort of see where there's a little trench for a utility repair.
So we'll have to figure out why
Okay.
it was left off. So it was out of the scope, and yeah, maybe there was a utility issue and we didn't want to have to tear it up after we put it down. I don't know. I'll find out.
thank you.
Does anybody else have another question at this stage?
And then those issues that came up over there that, because, about a month ago, you said, okay, 3 of them have been completed, these others are, they still have to come back and repair them, and they haven't taken care of those yet, have they?
No, I believe they have.
Okay.
I believe they have. So, yeah, they reworked a bunch of those areas up on, you're talking about,
I remember the portion of Lafayette, and then.
yeah.
The one you were just talking about,
Geneva?
Geneva, north of 90.
So I know they reworked those areas, and I think it was Berlin. Like there's a section of Berlin that extended further west, and yeah.
Did you get a chance to confirm that image that I sent you, that all of those were completed, except for the rework that's happening over by River Bluff?
I mean, I looked at it, and yes, I believe that's accurate. What you sent, the pink and the different colored lines, I think that's accurate.
Okay.
I
I think that we've got an opportunity here, and we'll work through this over the next few months with ClearPoint and other ways. There's obviously a disconnect in terms of what people are expecting and what we're demonstrating, so we'll just work through on.
Well, and that's what I want to do on, if you're talking about on the actual final product.
Well, as we have a project that comes up, understanding exactly what the scope of that project is, understanding what the timeline looks like and the impact, so that we can better communicate with the constituents of the different
Well, I
council
would-
zones and.
Yeah,
make sure
what I would
that we-
strongly encourage you to do is, when we bring these projects forward, typically they're brought forward with a original scope that has all the engineer's drawings, which include where the streets are going to go, right? And what the level work's going to be done. That's your best source of information. It's not, we don't take that and then, I think what you're saying is we probably need to do after the project or during the project is take that original scope and then put it in a way that's really for like a layman presentation,
No,
right?
I would take it like an executive summary.
Right.
So when we describe the project, it goes into an executive summary. These are the things, and you can,
Yeah.
again, this is something that I think that we can work through. If we don't understand it, I think that right now, we have a very proactive council that really digs into these things and understands them, and we do miss things. You miss things, I miss things, each one of us misses things, but if we've got these consistent misses, we just know that there's an opportunity to build clarity into those and figure out how to make those.
Yeah, and to your point, maybe it's adding, like, I know that one of the things we've done as part of the CIP process is we're going to change the agenda summary form that you all get so that it, let's see if it actually gives it back to you. so that we identify the funding sources and the PO and all, so that when there's not a disconnect internally, when that project gets approved, it's immediately tracked in the finance system. So you can see, even if no money's been spent on it yet, what the allocated amount was and that kind of thing. It earmarks it. We hadn't been doing that. We're going to do that going forward. And I think based on this commentary, one of the things we need to do as part of the project submission is create an executive summary that, is palatable, that, it's an executive summary for the project. So we can certainly work on that. And we'll have to have some back and forth like we have in the past on the reports and some other things about what that contains and that kind of thing. Okay. So now these are just the utility fund amounts spent and allocated and that kind of thing. So, and these should align fairly well with the level of completion. So we look at the smart meter program, for instance, we had budgeted almost $2.7 million. We spent just a little over $2 million of that. So there's 600,000 or so that's left to spend. Vehicle equipment replacement, we budgeted 656. We spent just under 600. The ponds, most of this is just engineering. Engineers are not cheap, but we had budgeted 342,000, and we've spent about 250 of that so far. CCTV cleaning is what I mentioned before. We have done all the CCTV cleaning that was budgeted. We know that there's still more for us to do, but we've exhausted the funds that were available. We spent slightly more than what was originally allocated. I believe, I'll have to double check. No, these are all bond. Yeah, this is, so when you're looking at these amounts, by the way, there are other amounts in the general fund that are in the CIP, as I pointed out before, that were cash, uses of cash. Those are not reflected in this sheet. This is just the uses of bond funds. So where it said we're going to use utility fund bonds or general fund bonds, that's the update you're receiving on the last couple of slides and on these slides. These are utility fund bonds that have been spent. Lift station repairs, and now that I said that, here's a couple of exceptions. Lift station repairs, you'll see there's a double asterisk there. If you look down below, it shows includes impact fee funds of $921,000. So we've been collecting impact fees. Impact fees can only be used for specific purposes, and those purposes have to be beneficial to the entire system. So there's only certain ways you can use them. So one of the ways that we plan on using those is in lift station maintenance or upgrades. So Country Village, for instance, that needs to be upgraded because it's receiving a lot more effluent than it used to, and that's an impact, right? The growth that's happening west of town is impacting that lift station. So we can use those impact funds for that purpose. So that's where a majority of that money that will be utilized to fix the Country Village lift station is going to come from. It's going to come from the impact fees that we've already collected.
How much growth west of town is coming in that Country Village?
A lot of it, right?
Not much more, but there's potential. We're going to upsize the pumps for that road.
Okay. So all that big is that a lot.
East of town or west of town?
East. That's
Yeah,
west.
yeah, that's why I was like.
I'm sorry, east. Oh, I said west.
That's why I was asking.
Well, at least we're striving for accuracy on this report. Thank you.
East.
And one more thing,
I think that was a
John
verbal
will
mistake.
appreciate, your vehicle.
Yeah.
Maintenance replacement.
Is it truly
You're showing-
over?
You're showing it over, but you notice.
It's an under.
Yeah. Good help's hard to find.
And so the impact fees, are those only generated when something new is built or developed?
Yes.
It's when the lot is sold,
Yeah, so, yeah.
right? Is it when?
It can be negotiated either way. The developer can pay for it, the builder can pay for it, or the buyer can pay for it. There's usually, the cities have the ability to collect at different stages. For most of the developments, they're being paid for when the lots are being sold, and that's when they're being sold to a builder. So the builder is paying the impact fee.
So those are one-time fees?
Yes.
Yep.
But for the infill lots in Castroville, those are being paid when the utility is hooked up.
That's correct. And the impact fees are about, I'm going to say a little over $9,000 for water and wastewater combined. So every time someone builds a new house, it's going to be about $9,000. Commercial impact fees are assessed based on the size of the meter, So if their size of their meter is the same size as what a residential would be, then they're gonna pay that same amount. But if they buy like a 3-inch meter, the impact fee is gonna be considerably higher. And that table of impact fees is in your adopted rate table.
Now, are those fees impacted because if we're going by with our water restrictions things, no new lines can be connected?
In stage
What are you asking?
In
stage
stage 4,
4.
are those impact fees put on hold until we can do the connections?
No, they still pay for no.
It depends on when it was scheduled. If it
Yeah.
was scheduled, if the payment was scheduled when they made the connection, like when the physical connection, obviously that wouldn't be charged until after we actually.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Yeah, we generally, the way we're doing it right now, and this is the way you would hope, if the shoe was on their foot, right, and you're trying to build a house, the way that we're doing it now, we'll go ahead and charge the impact fee, and we might even go ahead and charge the tap fee and everything else, and just tell them, hey, you're allowed to proceed, design, do everything you can, but we're not going to actually hook this up until we're out of that drought stage.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Does that jive with what, I mean, so that's what, because again, drought stages come and go, and we don't want to hold up someone's development. But at the same time, we really can't give them a new meter, and so we go ahead and pretend as if it's going to
Okay.
work, but they don't get actually turned on until or unless we're out of that drought stage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Make
Yeah.
friends with your neighbor.
So I just said these are all bond monies, and then immediately told you that it's not actually all bond monies. There's a couple of, and this is really just to kind of highlight a couple of areas where we're using funds that we already have on the books, and that's that CWSRF and the DWSRF that I mentioned before, drinking water and clean water, and then impact fees. So this is where the impact fees are being used. And then the sewer collection lines, again, we've spent, or we budgeted 825, we spent about 650, and there's 150 or so left. Annual water line replacement, we had budgeted 1.7. That includes about $300,000 of drinking water revolving funds. Again, those haven't been approved for use yet. So impact fees, y'all have we have the choice to we don't have to ask anybody permission, we use them. But DWSRF, CWSRF, those are Texas Water Development Board administered funds, so we have to get their permission to ensure they're released. And we're going through that process now, but should be concluded fairly soon. So that's about $300,000. We've got 1.1 million left for the annual water line replacement. Some of that's committed, so it's not spent, but it's committed. SCADA upgrades, we'd originally budgeted 100,000. This shows we spent 16, but I think there's a couple of bills that are yet to be entered, so we probably spent a little bit more than that already. Phase 2 master plan. This was the elevated water tank that I mentioned earlier. The city is on a 40-60 split on that project. So 60% of that's supposed to be paid for by developers, 40% by the city. That's how that was originally adopted in the CIP. However, Cobblestone was one of the participants, and they had a pretty large percentage of that project, and they're no longer they're not at the table anymore. That developer went away. So the city's portion is more than likely going to increase on this project. Now that will give us the ability to recoup those funds in impact fees later, but just as a heads up. We've already spent about $350,000 of the 440. We did send collection letters, if you will, to each of the developers. And in fact, Cobblestone, I believe, paid a portion of the engineering just before they severed their relation, or they left, canceled that contract. So we did get a last payment from them prior to them leaving.
Hey, on your smart meter program, do you all have any feel how much more of that 660,000 you're going to spend? I know you all
All of it.
meters. Is it going to be all of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I fully anticipate that we'll spend all that money.
But it shouldn't go over that, or maybe?
No, it will, because as part of that project, this was how much, I don't believe we recognized the gas meters in this, or the private contractor that we've hired to install those gas meters, because that was done separate. This really, that 2.7, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's just the Amoresco contract. So that's just them doing their work. In addition to that work, the gas system is going to have to pay for the install and the purchase of those meters. And that is represented in the $2 million that's spent, But I anticipate, and this is the type of detail you should see in a ClearPoint, you can drill down into. You'll see who's getting paid out of what, and that kind of thing. But I think one of the adjustments that's going to be made to this when we adopt the new CIP in January is that you'll see this smart meter program is going to, the line will increase to recognize the gas system costs. And those gas system costs, if I had to estimate them, a little less than 500,000, I think. Yeah. So that'll increase by, we'll spend all the 660 plus another $500,000. Which is why, anyway, what do you go? I forget the term, but spoiler, I guess. We're not going to, utility funds and general funds are already committed on the bonds. Like, there's really no extra money. There's a small amount of extra money, if you want to consider it extra, on the general fund side that I've just plugged in as streets, but it's not enough to do any real street replacement. So then when we get to talking about how we're going to use our money, that's part of what I'm going to talk about, because you have some obligations that will come with grants and some other things, and I would suggest just not, like, we're going to consider this CIP cooked. It's done, it's in the oven, it's committed, utility is committed, general fund's committed. Until we issue new bonds, we're really only going to be looking at how we use our cash. And on the utility fund, as we already know, we're not going to use any cash on the utility fund side, because that's why we have to raise rates. Unfortunately, we've got to pay that $1 million in debt service. So we don't want to be spending their cash at this stage. Other than the few items that are already recognized in the CIP, which don't amount to a whole lot of money. On the general fund side, it's a different story. So the rest of the meeting, after I get done with this portion, will be focused on just the general fund, our cash reserves, and how y'all want to spend them going forward. Okay, did we go through all this? I think so. Skate upgrades, we talked about phase 2, that's the elevated tank. Wastewater treatment plant improvements, this is another area where we're using some funds that we've gathered. We haven't spent any of that money because I'm still waiting on TWDB to authorize us to say, yeah, we're clear. But there's about $800,000 worth of money, and there's a number of, as y'all remember, that wastewater treatment plant, we value engineered towards the end of that project to keep under budget, or within tolerances, I guess. So there's a number of things at the treatment plant that really we need to do that should have been done when the plant was upgraded a few years back. But then in addition to that, there's other improvements that really need to be made that it's just because it's time to make those improvements, whether it's a clarifier improvement or something along those lines. So that money's sitting there. That's not that's extra money. It's not bond funds. It's from the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And then River Bluff. This is the electric improvements, and so we budgeted about a little over $2 million. We've only spent about $575,000. And to Phil's point earlier, are we going to spend it all? Yeah, probably. I think we're going to get very, very close to the number that we contractually said we would spend. Keep in mind, we did build in, I think it was a performance pay. So if they don't finish on time, or if they don't finish early, then we won't owe them that extra money. But they'd asked for an additional percentage basically before the project was started. We went, I can't remember how much it was, 6% more or something. And we basically negotiated that extra percentage that they wanted into a performance. Like if you get done within 9 months, for every month you're done sooner than that, we'll give you a percent. Up to 6%, I think is the way we worded it. Something like that. So anyway, that's that project. I'll have to verify that 2.07 includes that amount. If it doesn't, that'll be another one that gets updated. The impact fee and master plan. This was the drainage master plan, I believe. And this is another area that I'm going to look a little deeper into, because right now it shows we spent 109 more than what we had allocated. I just have to verify that that was all drainage. We do have, well, that's drainage improvements. Oh, that's true. We have 320 allocated for drainage improvements, but and only 140 spent. But I don't even know what that would have been spent on.
Didn't we do the drain cleaning on Country Village? Those drains needed cleaning.
Oh yeah. Well, we did the. We had the drainage ditch, right? We did some work there, but I don't remember what that
I
total cost
thought we
was.
pushed out some of the overgrowth and sedimentation in the
Right.
country village area.
It's still not finished.
Yeah.
That's another project that's gonna be done with MP Homes, the Heights of Castroville. But you're right, we did do some work there, so that may be what some of that money is. So anyway, there's a couple of areas where I wanna get a little bit more detail to make sure this is accurate. So this just kind of gives you an overall. Here's your budget. For the general fund, it was originally $4,650,000. We issued $4,650,000. We spent $3,101,000, and we have a balance remaining of 1.5. Of that 1.5, all but around 300,000 or so is committed. We've signed contracts, what have you, to commit the vast majority of that money. Utility fund, same kind of story. We have a budget on the utility fund of 4.4 in 2022, and we issued 4.6. And then 2023, we had a budget of $5 million. We issued $5 million. The difference here is you will see that there's more, way more money than what we borrowed, right? Well, part of that is because, remember, we're including drinking water, state revolving fund, clean water, state revolving fund, and the impact fee. Those amounts total are a little over $2 million. It's like $2.2 million. So when you see that we're over by about the same amount, and that's what that is. That's those amounts. But that also tells you that we're pretty well committed on the utility fund. There may be some extra dollars, but not much. And some of that's going to come forward pretty soon when we bring the Country Village project forward. That's, I think, going to come to you in December, maybe? We'll approve going out for an RFP in November, and then we'll either approve it at the December meeting, like award the bid in December or January, one of those two. So
That's for electrical upgrade?
that is for, no, that's for the lift station upgrade. So it's not just electrical, it's actually sizing the lift station, adding pumps. It's about $1 million plus, what we expect. Okay, so that's the end of the update on the CIP. What I would like to do now is look at our, Devin, how do I get it to show when I'm not in a presentation mode? I want it to show this screen. I had this problem the other night. I just want to see Excel. It should be able to do that, right?
Move Excel over into the other sheet.
This one,
Oh, you got two screens.
no, but it's the big button you have to hit to make it show. And the only thing I think I can make it do is if I do this. Sometimes if I do that, that makes it work. Now I do that. There we go. Okay. I don't know why I have to do that, but whatever. So this is where, so you have utility fund reserve use. So one of the things I did when we had this is the CIP document. Make it smaller. You have all these cash fund uses at the bottom, where we're going to use general fund reserves and utility fund reserves, these portions in brown, right? When we adopted the CIP, I broke just those portions out for you so you could see how that money is being spent. So here's a bit of good news. And I told you we're only going to really focus on the general fund. And so that's what we're really going to look at right now is the general fund cash balances. If you recall, I apologize, I'm going to jump around a little bit. This is, oh, you know what?
Your next slide.
No, I'm trying to remember if I might have closed it, or I might have it open on my other computer. If you recall, you've been given 2 reports within the last couple of months. One of them was the second budget hearing. At the second budget hearing, you were shown how much of our fund balance we were going to contribute. We estimated fund balance contribution. 100 points, to anybody who can remember what that was. What did we say was going to happen in the general fund?
$127,362.
We're going to contribute or we're going to use. Do you remember? First, okay, we'll break them up, 50 points and 50. First, who thinks that we are going to dip into fund balance versus contribute to fund balance?
I think we're gonna dip in.
Dip in,
I
by show
remember
of
they just
hands?
split
Yeah,
between different
that's
areas.
part of the reason it got real confusing. And I'm not trying to put you on, I'm putting you on the spot, but not really, because, I mean, I know this stuff's hard to keep track with, but we flipped on it, we flipped the script on
So you're
both
saying
the.
it depends on which day you were.
That's
talking
right.
about.
I did say second budget hearing, though. Second budget hearing.
Okay.
Second budget hearing. We flipped the script at the second budget hearing, and we went from contributing to dipping in. So the people who said you got brave enough to say dipping in, you're right. You get 50 points. For the other 50 points, do you know how big a swing it was? How much we were using?
Oh, it was pretty decent. I don't remember what it was.
It's 100,000. You have it on the nose. It's $100,000. That's an estimate. Leroy would like me to stress, it is an estimate. It's an estimate. It's only an estimate. We won't know until we get an audit. It's just an estimate, folks. But we estimated about $100,000. The good news is we spent $800,000 or more, slightly more than that, in the general fund on like one-time expenditures. $800,000 of your $4.4 million or whatever we spent by the end of the year. $800,000 was on one-time expenditures, and of that, only $100,000 is coming out of your general fund balance. So kudos to you that we aren't going to spend as much as we thought. So looking at this,
Were those budgeted 800,000?
no.
These
So
were the
liquidity,
amendments.
$165,000. Balance scorecard, $25,000. Like there was a list, and on so you got to see that twice. Once was on, and I'll actually bring them up real quick if you want to see them. But we then had the more recently in the fourth quarter report, the finance report. There was a slide in there, and over on the left-hand side where it talked about general fund fund balances. On the left, there was a descriptor that said, here's the 2 times you all approved budget amendments, and here's the amount of those budget amendments. It was like 338,000 and 536,000, something like that, which is where I got the 800 and change. So we've already seen that. You've already seen that. I'm just kind of reminding you of it. But the net result was what we anticipate is an estimated use of fund balance of about $100,000. And so what that means is when we looked at this, those expenditures, the largest part of those expenditures was $275,000. I'm going to take you over here, show you. It's up just a little bit. The largest expenditure was this one. And stop. Can I do this? Was that $275,000 for PD, and that was a whole host of things. That was radars and body cams and tasers and servers and technology and software. It was a lot of different things. So, of that $800,000. All of that, all of the PD expenditures are in that, but they're also in this CIP, okay? But in the CIP, they weren't going to be bond funded, they were going to be cash funded. So they weren't budgeted, Phil, in the sense that they were not in the annual budget, but they were budgeted, 275 of that 800,000 was budgeted in the CIP. So the good news is, going back to your use of fund balances, this 322, when we just did simple math and said, okay, your beginning cash available is 3.7 million, you're going to spend 300,000 of general fund cash, and that'll leave you 3.4. Well, what we're finding is you actually needed about 100,000, not 322. So we have, and I want to make sure I'm not screwing up my dates. Yeah, that's 2022, 275, 2022. In 2023, We also had EMC, we had some technology purchases, the airport fence, which I told you at the last meeting, the airport actually ended up paying for, we didn't have to pay for it. So going back to fund balance uses, the short story is this amount, this original amount of 3.7, it is safe to estimate that we have about 3.6. If you be really conservative, you could say 3.5. But you have $3.5 million of your cash that is available to use. Yeah.
Are you saying
That's
for
right.
FY, are these calendar or FY?
These were calendar years.
Okay.
These were calendar years. But we're just going to, I think for simplicity, we're going to call it $3.5 million. You have $3.5 million of free board cash. This does not include the amount of money that you would need to have on hand for your days on hand.
This is above that.
This is above that. I'll show you that calculation here. Give me a little bit of grace in that I didn't go through the process of updating this to make it more current, using the current budget, that kind of thing, but this was all based on the budget. See, this is 2022. This was all based on the 2022-2023 budget. I can plug in 23-24 budget, and you'll see your days on hand. You need a little bit more money, right? But it's not a lot. It's not a huge difference. It's not enough to worry about. 3.5 is still a good number. But what I did was I took those budgets, I divided by 365, I figured out what your daily cost is, and then I multiplied how much you want to have on hand. Here, 120 days. So that's a very conservative number, right? So for the general fund, is this general fund or utility fund? That's general fund, yeah. So general fund, for instance, there would still be, even if you used $3.5 million, you would still have $1.2 million in cash to cover needed expenditures. Make sense? Okay. So this is the part of the program where I have no slides, because I wanted to just have a conversation about what our obligations are and how to use these funds so that we can continue this workshop focusing on just the items that you want to focus on. But there a couple of things. One, the bridge project that went before TxDOT that we spent $150,000 engineering that we knew was a little bit of a gamble, but we felt very, very good about, unfortunately did not get approved by the TxDOT Commission. So that bridge project is not happening now. Doesn't mean we couldn't go back to them at some point in the future, but for now, that's off the table. It's good and bad news. It's good because, frankly, that was $5 million. That was a reimbursement grant, meaning we spend the money and then they reimburse us. And it was 90-10, so $1 million or more of that money we were never going to get back if we did that project. The bad news is it was a cool project and now it's not going to get done, at least not for the foreseeable future. However, they did award a $189,000 planning grant. That was the, I forget what they're calling it, not Safe Pathways, but Transportation Alternatives. It's a Transportation Alternatives Planning Grant. So think bike lanes, trails, that kind of thing. So we have a little under $200,000 of TxDOT's money, and I don't believe that had a match. I think that's 100%. So, and even if it's 10%, it's 20 grand that we'd have to come up with, so that's not a problem. But I think it's 100%. So just FYI, that freed up. If you, I was a little bit concerned that we had all these cash outlays that were going to come, and $5 million is a lot of money. But we don't have to worry about that right now. We are looking at doing the City Hall remodel. The City Hall remodel, as I mentioned before, is being funded primarily from the interest that we earn on the money that we have in the bank. Now, we cannot earn interest on the bond money. We can earn enough interest to pay the debt service. But the feds got wise to cities trying to do this in the past, arbitrage borrowing, because they knew that they could borrow less than the privates, So they set laws years and years ago that if a city earns more than it is supposed to on the debt service, on the bond money, it actually has to remit back to the federal government the difference. So we don't get to keep, but the good news is that our debt service payments, to a certain extent, are covered by the current rate. So, but we can't count on that money, but that's a good thing for the utility fund to think, if you think about it that way. So we are just again kind of enumerating what some of our pledges are, some of the things we're doing. One of them is to do a city hall remodel. I anticipate that to be about $1.5 million. We'll see what the bids actually come out as once we bring them out. But that'll be something that we're paying. You know, we make about $400,000 or so a year in interest. So it's going to take, that's several years of interest, assuming prevailing rates of interest, right? So there's a use of cash that you know, we'll just, you know, we'll have to see how the market, whether it holds up and what happens.
When do you anticipate doing that?
That's going to be dependent on you all, and
Based on the funds that we have available from that funding source.
but again, it depends on your comfort with spending that money before you've actually earned it, right? So if you want to be ultra conservative, you could say, we don't really want to spend that money until we've earned it. And we're going to track our interest, and once we've hit 1.5, we'll spend the money then. The challenge then, of course, is what's it going to cost 3 years from now, right? So, you know, my desire would be to do it sooner than later, but it's really going to be dependent on you all and what we do. I want to, the other thing is that project I have not been pushing really hard on. I've just kind of been not slow rolling on purpose, but taking my time. There's no real effort. I'm not really not pushing timelines and deadlines and all that. In part because we've got a community center project that is funded and that requires time and energy. So I'm letting that be the hog our time. So I'm not really pushing City Hall, but when we're ready, like when we're ready to take it out for bid, I'll let you know, but I don't even have a time frame for that. Probably sometime at the beginning of next year, I'll be ready to do that. We have been slow, like I said, we've been making some slow progress. One of the things that's neat that was recently done is we had a LiDAR of this building and a LiDAR of the library done. So I'm hoping to have that produced in the form of a video that you can see and watch, kind of like what the county did for one of their facilities. So that, anyway, there's little incremental progress being made on the City Hall building. But there is $1.5 million that is unearned interest right now that you can just kind of mentally say, okay, there's that amount that could be committed. In addition, we have the Parks Grant. You recall that there is an opportunity to go and apply for a $1.5 million Parks Grant that is 50-50. So it's really $750,000 for you put up $750, you get $750 for a total expenditure of $1.5. I mentioned earlier that I would advise you on how to think about spending your cash, and my strong advice is to look at projects where you can leverage the cash on hand with either a grant or third-party participation. So for Ms. McVeigh's comfort and mental ease is, you know, something like an animal shelter. If there's a grant out there to match with it, fantastic. We already know that the animal group has a little over $60,000 that they've collected towards a building that's specifically for a building fund. So there's some money there that is a private participation or nonprofit participation. There may be a grant for an animal shelter, and then of course the county's participation, whether the county's willing to actually be a participant and help pay for part of that building. That might be a way to leverage cash on hand with a project that you have. The Parks Grant obviously has a matching component. That's a great way. Every dollar you spend, you get $1. So my strong advice is look for projects that have matching. Unfortunately, that means streets. We don't have, typically, you don't see matching grants for streets. I'm not going to say it's impossible because, frankly, there's been some things that have come out of the federal government with this infrastructure bill that were new. They'd never happened before. The investment in broadband, for instance, that's a completely, those types of grants weren't available before, but now all of a sudden we're seeing fiber to the home in areas that is not financially viable to do on a market basis, but it's because of the federal system that they're able to do those. So I'm not going to say never, but typically you won't see something for streets. You do see parks grants come out. You do see downtown planning grants, downtown, like historic downtown sidewalk grants you can find. They won't necessarily, that'll be like CDBG, Community Development Block Grant money. So that's federal money that's administered by the Department of Agriculture at the state level. And any other, any other grant project you can think of that, like the STEM project that we're pursuing at the airport, ostensibly that would be with private partnership, with sponsorship, with federal monies, local money. So those are types of projects that I would, if I were in your shoes, I'd want to try and prioritize over just like my neighbor says, I want my street fixed or whatever. If you can't put the dollar with another dollar, then it's something that needs to wait until we can go issue bonds. That's my advice to you.
It's related to Kyle's animal shelter. Are we, I guess it's been only 6 months ago, I remember we were going to talk to the county.
So we had a...
But also, has anybody looked at going to grants? Is our grant writing people looking at that?
There's several of those grants out there. I'm looking at it right now
For animal shelters?
for animal shelters.
Great.
So you're doing that?
Well, I'm just looking online right now for our.
Oh, I thought you were volunteering for that.
No.
It'd be interesting to see who are the agencies that are providing those grants?
You got ASPCA, you got the Bissell Pet Foundation, you got the Doris Day Animal Foundation, you have Great Good Charities Rescue Bank, you got Hill Food Shelter and Love, Maddie's Fund, Michelson Found Animal Saving Pets Challenge, Pedigree Foundation.
So some of those, when you look at those foundation grants, a lot of those are going to come, like the cat one we did the other night, very specific restrictions on how that money is used, and the amount of money that's available is typically of a smaller quantity, like $19,000 for cats. But it's a cat program that releases, it's a neuter release type program. These will probably have similar ties, but there are some like the anytime you hear SPCA, a lot of times their grants are sizable and don't have nearly as many strings attached.
The Purina Shelter Champions, they're all about the shelters and.
So it depends on, it depends on the type of strings that come with that. But to answer your question, Phil, no. In part, no one. In other words, no one's looking at grants at this moment. In part because we really need to, I feel like, establish with the county a location first and foremost, and whether or not this is going to be a joint facility or our facility. All of our conversations with the county, because they're with the county, have focused on a joint facility of some kind. I don't need to tell you all the challenges, but one of the challenges is obviously animal control presently at the county is under the sheriff. The sheriff has only been a part of, I think, one of those conversations, didn't we?
Yeah, we've had that
Has he been a
discussion.
part of two, I think? So I just don't know whether they're prepared to pull the trigger on that, what they want to do, where they want to do it. We've made some suggestions about location if it's a joint facility. If it's our own facility, it makes it both easier and more expensive on some level, right? It'd be easier because we can control the when, the where, the how, but more expensive because it'll be all on us, right? So there's advantages to sharing with the county. There are advantages and disadvantages. To Kyle's point earlier, I reached out to the county recently, and again, this is not to throw them under the bus. I know they're very, very busy, and they have lots of other priorities, but I have not heard back from them since I reached out to them. I think it was about a month ago, shortly before I went on my cruise, so within the last 3 weeks. Did you?
About a month ago, I think it was.
Yeah. So
3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah. So probably need to reach out to them again. But that would be an example of a project that once we start to nail down, well, here's the scope, here's what type of partnership it's going to be, here's where it's going to go, then we can go out and look for a grant. I think if we do it before then, it'll be premature. Because they're going to have a lot of those questions for us, and if we can't answer them, then we're really not helping ourselves. So,
because it's not just the cost of the grant, it is cost of the running the facility, the
Maintenance and
staffing.
operations.
Well, it's staffing. Staffing is an expensive thing. Yep.
Maintenance and operation.
Yeah, operations is
O&M.
staffing. Right. And typically, any facility project, O&M eats construction costs for lunch. The construction costs might be millions of dollars, but over the life of that building, 30, 50 years, O&M's gonna cost more than the cost.
It never stops.
So, going back to 3.5 million, of that, 750 is committed. If you approve going out for this grant, which you already did. We expect to be awarded the grant in December. We will know if we were awarded in December. If you choose to accept the grant in December, then you've committed $750,000, which again, gets you $1.5 million of improvement. And I'm really excited I really hope that we get that grant because, when you talk about quality of life improvements that are noticeable to the public, streets and parks are really the two areas where people really sit up and take notice that the city's doing something and they get really excited about. So there are some pretty significant improvements that would come with that grant were we to receive it. And that'll be talked about when we get the grant and we ask you to make that formal commitment if that actually happens. The remainder of that 3.5, so now you're down to $2,750,000. Ostensibly, the city hall pays for itself on some level. So I don't know how much you want to count of that money. But you have $2.7 million that you can try to put towards other projects. And there are a couple of smaller projects. One of them we've talked about in the past, but restrooms, getting a restroom trailer that would be used for events.
Hey, didn't you notice that we have restrooms now on Houston Square?
On Houston Square.
Yeah. It's right next to the smoke pits. Just go down the little walkway,
Oh, yeah.
look at the smoke pits,
Oh, yeah. You
grab
mean
the
there's
restroom.
Oh, that's true.
go get a drink.
Yeah, they have public restrooms there. You're not wrong. Those are nice restrooms.
Semi.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're
Well,
open
that'll-
access from the outside.
Yeah, well, the same, yeah, so we have the restroom back here, like, when we talk about programming, and we talk about tourism for the downtown area, that's actually something to really think about is those types of amenities that are available off of Houston Square. I lost my train of thought. Oh, but, so, a restroom trailer, did you get an expense? What was that?
It's 70.
About $70,000. So one idea from staff is
How many restrooms is that?
that'd be 6, 3 and 3. If you go to, you can go to any size you want. What we recommend is 3 and 3 because, and these would not be ADA accessible. To make them ADA accessible is larger. This would be a single axle, not a double axle, or double axle, not triple.
Double hundred.
Yeah, double,
What did
not
it
triple.
cost you to rent those for Easter a year ago?
3,500 to 4,500.
Yeah.
That's our range because it just jumped dramatically.
How?
And that's for the weekend.
Yeah, as of right now, we're spending between city events, Easter, Fort Castro, Christmas, National Night Out, yard sale, right under $10,000.
And that's
Now, some of
portable,
those
but
you
those
may
are the
still
portable
need,
ones.
sorry, I talked over you.
Not the trailer, but the portable ones.
Yeah, so that's both. Some of those are trailers, some of those are portables. You may still need a couple of portables from time to time. This wouldn't take care of all of the restroom needs, but it would take care of most of them. At the Christmas event, at some of the other events, for instance, the Tour de Castroville, I think they do 8, right? So they would still need a couple of porta potties. They would have to go rent for other areas, but this would take care of the ones that they usually rent at Regional Park. And they would, we've already talked to these other groups, the Chamber and whatever it's called, Special Events Group.
What's
and
the lead time?
they support the city's effort to go and buy one, and then they would rent it. So I think if for no other reason, then we believe it would pay for itself. It certainly would be convenient, but again, that's up to you. But that's one.
What's the lead
use
time of
of
those?
funds. You'd probably get one pretty quick.
The two companies that I've been back and forth through by board, they have some in stock right now.
Yeah.
And is that a single, so you say a 3 and 3, so it's a single entrance into a 3-stall, or is?
It's a dual, so it's a.
Male side,
Two different
female.
doors, yeah. So women 3-stall, men, it's 1 stall and 2 urinals split. So
Okay, yep, that was the question.
And
So
you can
four
move
doors.
with a standard truck. You can move it.
Correct,
Pickup.
correct. And that's all encasing minus the electrical. There's everything's on board, water tank, storage tank, everything, so it's very versatile.
Are they conditioned?
Yes, and the one that we actually got is Four Seasons. We're not
Hey,
sure that we did for.
Ask me that in July.
So
I've gone into a porta potty.
we
in
can
July.
make a presentation to you on the options and what we're recommending, a more full presentation. I intentionally did not do that for this meeting because I didn't want to chase any rabbit trails that y'all weren't interested in. But if that's something that interests you, we'll chase that down. On the general fund side, again, I think we had a bunch of other parks projects that we had looked at. We haven't pursued those, or brought those to you because this grant, that $750,000 will go a long way to taking care of a bunch of those. There's still, even, believe it or not, even if we spent $1.5 million, there's still additional park improvements that you could look at in the master plan and elevate and bring forward. So that's another area that you all can go look at is that Parks Master Plan and the list of projects that they identified. One of the items that's not in there that has come up recently as a desire is that new pickleball, the new sport.
That's not in the Parks Master Plan?
It is not in the Parks Master Plan. Interesting. Because it was, I don't know how big a deal it was, or nobody was really thinking about it, but
Before pickleball was a big thing.
yeah, it's been around since the '70s, but apparently it's getting a lot of popularity recently. So,
Well, I
that's
just think
not
that
listed.
anything, my point with this is that anything that we're doing in there, let's make sure that it gets, if it becomes a priority, let's make sure that we get it into the master plan.
And that we shared the same. That message was delivered to the Parks Board. We talked. In fact, yeah, yours truly gave them. Hopefully, something that didn't sound too much like a lecture, but I basically said that.
Yeah. And I think that we need to do that with all of the things. If we've got a master plan, let's use the opportunity. If we're looking at changing something that is not in there, let's use that as an opportunity for everything that we have. That includes, once we get to the downtown master plan, if priorities change, they go first into the master plan to verify that it is an updated need, and then we can go for funding. I mean, it can happen basically at the same time, but it needs to be aligned with that.
I think I get a little uneasy when we keep saying, well, going to have $1.5 million for the parks if we get this 50-50. It seems to me, if you don't have something already in the master plan and in the CIP, then you shouldn't just out of thin air say, we got to go out and spend another $500,000. I don't like that idea. I think we should be starting the other way. We should be focusing on what's important, when do we want it, put it in the master plan, the CIP, and then fund it as you can. But just to say, well, just because this grant came along, let's think up $50,000 or $100,000 worth of project, that's just a way to waste money.
And yes, I agree with you. The only caveat I would say to that is that when the grant eligibility came about, the first place we looked was at the actual master plan, and that we're victims of our own success in that when that plan was being adopted, there was no funding source for any of those projects. So I think in some ways the people that were working on that didn't have a real high hope of ever getting funded, let alone getting funded as quickly as they did. And so that may have hampered their efforts to really be creative about thinking about all the different ways they could spend that money. That's number one. Number two, now that we've funded a bunch of those things, we now need to look further down the list. So there is a place to look, and I agree with you. You could go through the effort of saying, let's add those, and we can, the staff can bring you a list of the things that we're thinking of including with that $1.5 million, and then you all can prioritize. Okay, where do we think, whether we have the funding or not, where do we think those priorities sit? I think that's an excellent mental exercise to go through.
Let me kind of restate what I think that Herb just called out, is that think about CIP as our master plan for our capital investments. Think about the Parks Master Plan as the master plan for the parks. And being a master plan, we need to make sure that it is updated methodically and aligning those different master plans instead of the fun project of the day. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, but I go to the meetings and I listen to the people discuss projects, and it's very clear that there is no consensus in the advisory board about what the top 6 projects are, or the top 7. There isn't any consensus. I asked them very clearly at the last meeting. I said, we're having a workshop on the 31st of October. We should have a list from you that should say, here's your top 10 in the order you want them and how much they're going to cost. We should really have a good understanding of what you're saying to the city council in your actions to try to implement the master plan. And there's a breakdown there. And they need more time and more opportunity, and now they have a full board, they can start moving out on that. But I just don't like the idea of saying, we got $1 million, let's go figure out a way to spend it. I'd like to turn it around.
Yeah, and I don't think we're suggesting doing that, but you're right. I mean, it's something definitely to.
We need to
look
get
at.
it into the plan and into the CIP first before we start funding.
Okay.
Well, and a perfect example like that is our library. Our library does need some TLC, and we're growing. Our library needs to keep up with the growth.
But we don't have a master plan that lays that out.
They are working on it.
Right, but it's in here in the CIP library. You know, it looks like 432,000 and some change.
I'll bring it up.
Yeah, on the first.
You get a bigger screen, by the way, for.
Zoom in. There.
Yeah, 345.
Yeah, 345.
Yeah.
And again, the numbers that, when we originally put this together, those are all fudge factor numbers that just kind of put some amount. I think, and that, you know, go ahead.
But we have it in our CIP. I mean,
Right.
it
And
is,
if we accelerate action on it, that's
it's not, it's,
forbidden.
right. So I mean, it's in there.
So is the animal shelter, right?
Yes, the
Yes.
animal shelter's in there.
It is in 26.
But if we can accelerate action on it, we can
Right.
accelerate action on
And
We
right,
had a public safety building in 2026. I think our chiefs told us that that may not be, I mean, did we look at the time frame? Have I already moved that out? I moved it out
I think
once.
we did move it out based on some of the stuff we need in storage, more so than
Yeah.
anything else.
I think we could probably push this out at least a couple more years, depending on.
Part of that though had to do with.
But so, to what I hear you saying, and what I hear, you know, two of you saying is, the mayor and Herb, is that we really need to look at our CIP as our guiding light, if you will, on how we're going to spend funds. And to the extent that we're going to update the CIP, you know, we need to do that, right? We need to add items, and they ought to come through the board, the various boards and commissions. So one of the things that we're working on, because the library, so also understand that the amount that was put for the library facilities was not a new library building.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that.
Well, I'm just making clear so we're all on the same page. The 345,000, that was a library expansion or improvement at the existing location. To build a new library would be millions of dollars.
yeah, no, I'm not looking
And
at
the plan that they're going to come up with that's going to be presented to you, I'm certain will anticipate a new building somewhere at some point in time. The steps that I'm taking right now are to look at what does an expansion look like, and I kind of briefly outlined that for you earlier. When I have more information to share with you, I'll bring it to you and show you, okay, this is what that expansion looks like, and here's about how much it would cost. Now let's talk about whether we can fund it. Is there a grant, for instance, that would fund the library expansion or not? Not as typical, but there are limited options out there potentially. Just, you have to get lucky sometimes.
And then the animal services, 400,000. We're looking at $1 million to spend right there between library and animal services.
Right.
But this is 2026.
I understand, but that's in our CIP. If we're looking at our CIP,
Yeah, there's two items.
correct.
Right.
Okay. Phil?
Can I just say one
Hold
thing
on.
real quick?
Hold on, let's work through this first.
The 3+ million we have, that, is that part of our, I'm going to use the term reserves, where we're supposed to keep so much money in the bank, or this is stuff above and beyond?
It's
Above and beyond.
Right,
Okay.
right. He had
Clarified
deducted the
that.
1.2 million for the 120-day.
But one of the reasons that we have good loan rates when we did it is because our fund balances were up above and beyond. And
Yeah,
that's
but-
not gonna affect that.
No, in my experience, you have to forecast your use. So when you have those S&P calls with the rating agency, you just have to tell them, hey, just as a reminder, yes, we have this awesome fund balance, but we are going to spend it down because our ultimate goal is to only maintain about 120 days. And they know 120 days is perfectly reasonable. Like, to have more than a year is ridiculous. But they still don't like to see you spend it unless they know you're going to spend it. So you have to do a real good job of forecasting that, which we've done. In our past rating calls, we forecasted the use of fund balance and pointed out how we're going to spend $345,000. But the fact of the matter is, we didn't, in the year one, we didn't, not only we did not reduce our fund balance, but we added to our fund balance, right? Because of our financials. This year, we're actually going to reduce fund balance by some amount, 100,000 or so.
Now, and then going on, my thought here is that here in December, we're gonna have to make a decision, if we're gonna spend the 750,000 if we get the grant.
That's right.
At Parks. So that's a sizable portion of that, 20% or so of that.
It all depends, keep in mind, it all depends on how aggressive you are in your spending. Because as you saw this year, we spent 800 or so. Well, you only had to cover 100 of that out of fund balance or so.
Right.
The same thing, you could say, we're gonna spend 750, but if you don't approve any other projects, and that's the only money you spent, well, guess what? You may end up finding that you didn't spend 750 out of fund balance, you spent some fraction of that. So that's where it really depends on how aggressive you want to be about spending those cash reserves. But my general advice is, regardless of what your priorities are, align your priorities with funding opportunities for grants and that kind of thing, and help us as staff understand, well, what do you care, what would you really like to see get done? And I know we have one very anxious person that says, I want an animal shelter, by God, before I die, preferably, right? I want one in my lifetime, is what I've heard many times, which is great.
I think you read there, spot on, right.
So,
But like, I guess then, in my mind, it's hard to make a decision where we want to spend the money unless we know what our grant, because I totally agree with you. If you can get 50% matching, 100% matching,
But if it comes in for parks, not for an animal shelter, then we're stuck.
with the parks, but
Right.
there, if that same opportunity is there, maybe those opportunities are out there for the animal shelter. So, but we don't have anybody looking for that right now, I guess.
I'll look for it, I'll look for it.
Good.
You have to have the land, that's the.
I don't think the land's an issue.
But that's for going out for all these grants. I've looked into all of them, and you have to have the land before you can even get down the page.
Interesting.
And we had the land.
But we
before.
committed the land.
Yes, you did.
And, I mean, it's still that commitment there, so.
And we've looked at other options, just to be
If
clear.
you get someone to come us and offer to give us $400,000 for an animal shelter, believe me, I'm sure city council came up with the land.
But you actually have, you can't just say, we have the land. You have to give a real specific place of where the land is.
yeah.
I mean, you just can't generalize on it.
Well, and I'm not as optimistic about our ability to get the land, because we're going to need to think long and hard about the location for a bunch of noisy dogs, depending on the scale of the project, right? If you build a multi-million-dollar facility, you can soundproof it in a way that you can really put it just about anywhere and it's okay. But if you do it on the cheaper side, which is what is in this budget, $400,000 building, that's not a soundproof building. That's a metal barnuminium with, it's a very basic building. It'd be a nice building, certainly nicer than anything we have today, but it won't be the kind that you could put in the middle of a residential area or in a commercial area that it'd be an issue. So that's the kind of thing that we have to work through. Are we building this on our own dime with their grant and us staffing it? In that case, it's going to be, think of a rural vet clinic. It's going to be something that's low cost and not 24-hour the operations will be minimal, but the adoption abilities will be minimal. It'll be based on volunteerism largely for adoption. There's just a whole separate process and scope that goes with that project versus a partnership with the county where we say, okay, we're going to enter into a multi-city partnership potentially for the county, and each of the cities are going to pay their fair share based on the number of dogs that are collected.
So we're going down a road. I'm
Yeah.
going to move us along because we do have some time constraints here.
Okay.
But I think that what we need to go through as we're doing this, like when I look at 2026, I think 2026 is very realistic. I think it's a little too realistic. I think that we look at these things, how do we space them out so that we can put the plan together? Because it's not as easy as just putting together the building. We have to also fund all of the other things. We don't have the funding for staffing.
You're talking 3 years down the line. You have so many animals now.
Right.
And nothing's being done other than what the local animal control can do. They're doing a great job.
Oh, yeah.
No problem with that. But I mean, even if you put it in the 3 years down the line, then that's another 2 years before anything would actually be accomplished. So you're looking at 5 years. The
Yeah.
expansion that's coming out this way now.
We're very aware of that.
Their animals and their dumping.
So we need to make sure that we put together a plan. It's not as easy as ready, shoot, aim. So it's about putting together the funding for it. The capital funding is what we're talking about now. We would still have to put together the operational funding, which we don't have funding, but we will, as this growth starts coming, that starts adding to the general fund, and we can put it into the plan. I think it's realistic for us to take a look at it as right now, based on the growth that we're expecting. I think that we can move that from a 2026 potentially to a 2025 project launch, and that gives us enough time to work through all of the budgeting issues.
Can you put some pressure on the county? Because that seems to be the hang-up right there.
We are putting pressure, and that's why I told you before, best thing for you to do is for you to continue to put pressure on them, just like you put pressure on us. Well, I don't say that as a negative thing. I'm not saying, like you've only disparaged me one time about that, but mostly you're very nice and respectful about it. But you will always keep it on the forefront, which when you're passionate about something, that's the right thing to do, and to gather support to approach the county, because if we're going to do this as a cooperative thing, because it probably will need to be, we'll just continue to put that on.
Return your calls, what do you do?
Keep on calling them.
I'm going to knock on the door.
What do? You keep on showing up. Yeah,
So-
we'll keep on working through this.
One of the things that I think is more immediate is, well, not more immediate, but another immediate need is the library expansion. I've already told you, I'm looking at what that would look like. This is budgeted for 2026. That's something I would like to see brought sooner. But again, that's going to depend largely on what the cost estimate is. So
Right.
as I get the design done, along with that design, what will be presented to council is our best estimate of what the cost of those projects. And then we can determine, well, do you want to do this in phases? Do we do it all at once? If we do it in phases, which phases do you do, and that kind of thing. So that's something moving forward. I just want to point this out. So in the CIP, back to kind of Herb's thought process of looking at this as your guidepost, when you look at other expenditure items that were listed in here, we've got on planning, down below, you've got your GIS system, future costs. Like I said, I think that's going to be moved to a general fund budget. But then you get down into the parks, and we had additional improvements at Lions, at Regional Park. There's considerable sums for future years. So it's not as if it's just coming out of nowhere. There was a total of $711,000. That's almost at $750,000 that went into kind of thinking about, and this is aligns with that Parks Master Plan. Houston Square.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
If I pick a number out, can you tell me what it's for?
I believe.
Because I don't think the Parks Board can tell me.
No, I don't.
They can't tell me what it's for.
They probably can't, but I can tell you that when staff came, when we did these numbers, because that was one of the areas that we actually had more detail than others, this should tie pretty well back to their master plan and the date ranges of those master plans. So
And
that's what I would look back at.
Part of, Scott's been talking about this, the CIP into the balanced scorecard, using the, what's called ClearPoint. So part of that is, one of the reasons that we wanted to put the general fund, it's a little bit clunky to put it into a balanced scorecard, but it's really, I think it's a very efficient way to put it into the capital improvement plan, because then you take individual projects and you insert those, and those individual, with an estimation of cost, timing, launch time. And so the idea is to make sure that we talked about things that are funded a lot. And it's very confusing to me, honestly, sometimes, like Scott will say, this is funded. I'm like, I really don't remember approving that. And so it's getting it into a software where we can say, we know, like, so as a city council person, you can go in and say, I know, I want to see everything on this year's CIP that has been approved, what the funding source is, where we are with the project, and it'll get us closer to that point. The goal is to have the current year that we're in, and I think probably the subsequent year, everything that is committed, where the funding source is, and so that it would be detailed as project level detail.
Yeah, I'd like to see the drainage projects for 2024. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't heard any discussion yet about spending any money in the CIP for drainage.
Well, I did promise to talk about that today, so you're giving me a really good segue, but I really want to wrap up general fund first on cash. So you heard a couple of different ideas of different ways you can spend cash, but I also want to remind you of a couple of things. So we're going to the community center project. That community center project more than likely will have unexpected costs, so we need to probably reserve a little bit of money there in case we need more than the $450 that you've already planned to spend out of your bonds. In addition, you have the UDO. Part of the UDO is a downtown master plan. I've already stated that we really need to look at monies that can be matched with something else. I think that we'll be in a good position to get a CDBG grant. I don't know what that would consist of, but for the downtown, and being able to do a project on the heels of adopting that downtown master plan will be important. But frankly, that's not something we have to worry about this year or even possibly next. That's like 2 years in the future. But I'm just kind of bringing these things up to think about as items that you want to, we've got them in the CIP. Are they in the years where they belong? And should we consider the funding source? So one of the things we can do in the CIP is go ahead and plan and say, okay, we think, for instance, the animal shelter, we want to move forward a year, and we believe that we're going to be able to find some kind of grant. So we're going to say minimum it's an 80-20. We might be able to find a 20% grant out there or something. Or maybe it's a share with the county, and we have 3 layers. We have a grant, a county share, and the city. But we can add those levels of detail to this document to make it a little bit more clear of what our thought process and planning is, not just for ourselves, but for those that read the document and for any future council members that come along and are asked to continue to institute it.
So what are the other items that you want to cover during this workshop?
Drainage. I'll just mention drainage.
Is drainage the last thing, or do we have other things that we're going to cover?
It's the only thing I can think of.
Okay. All right, let's talk about drainage.
Before we go to drainage, I just had a comment that
Yep.
I think there are some things in here, in the general fund stuff, that a joke that my mom and dad used to have is my mom would come home from shopping and my dad would say, "How much did you spend?" And my mom would say, "No, ask me how much I saved."
Yeah, of course.
And I sincerely hope they'll forgive me for voicing that in a public forum.
Right. Well, they're not the only ones.
Yes.
To a certain extent, saying we really need to focus on stuff we can get matched without first checking which things are critical, which things really need to get done, is kind of playing that but on the scale of a city.
Yep.
Well, don't ask me whether I fixed your street. Ask me how cheap I got the new place set at Lions
Right.
Park. And I know that particularly on streets, there was an examination of all the streets in the city before the streets project started, and some of the ones that were in the best condition before the streets project started got repaved first. And some of them that were much rougher are still waiting on it. And I don't know if this is like the true, actual, honest to goodness number, but streets replacement has 3.4 million unfunded going out into the future here.
That's a wild guess, but
I mean, just
you're just saying streets are a high priority.
I'm saying that we owe it to the people who live on those streets to think about whether that should be a higher priority than a 50% off
And
item.
the only thing I would
with the
suggest
Parks Master
is,
Plan.
because there is not a grant that goes with that money, the most prudent use of public funds would not to be used to cash, because it would be to put that to a bond, which you can do if you wanted to raise the INS even higher than we did this last year. Right? Next year, you say, we're not going to try to hold it to 52, we're going to raise it enough to go issue some debt to go do specifically streets. And that's all we're going to borrow some money and go do streets. That would be one way to do that. But again, you have $3.5 million. If you said, we're going to spend half of that or all of that on streets, that is completely the prerogative of the council. I would advise against it, because I think streets will, one, they're always going to be a problem. Even if you try to get to where, you've got to have a long-term commitment to maintaining those streets, and we are working on building that program. So one of the areas that I'm going to work with staff on is, if we're not, assuming we're not issuing additional debt to go do major street projects, is one, bring you what you heard Devin talk about, a county participation program, and look at what that would look like, which streets could we do with the county's assistance, and then two, what more do we need to do internally to be able to maintain them, and how can we have a more robust maintenance program on our own? So where we're not completely doing a replacement, but maybe we are chip sealing, like maybe we are like grinding up the first level, and it looks pretty new, but we didn't do a full rebuild and replace, right? Or reconstruct.
And could that latter project actually be done in like the M&O portion of the budget?
Right, and that's what I'm suggesting. I think you just, right now, we've been lax about M&O because we've had these other programs, but if we're not going to do more street programs in the future, or for the foreseeable future, then my suggestion, we need to focus on M&O, on streets. So that's something that staff will be working on to bring to you as a street solution. Drainage. So the drainage position, the thing I wanted to talk about was, we can go borrow, we have, okay, I'm trying to remember the amount. I should remember the amount. I'm going to say $350,000. I don't know if that's the right amount. We have about $300,000, $350,000 on hand from that $5 fee that everybody pays. I think it's 150 a year is how much we collect, or so. I'm trying to remember. But we have some of that money sitting there, because the bonds, that money was being collected to pay off the bonds. So the bonds got paid off. So now it's just collecting in a fund. That money can be used just to pay for a project. But it's not quite enough cash to pay for any single project. We could, I talked to our financial advisor when I was up at TML, we could go issue debt just to do a limited, like $2 million debt issuance, just to go do some drainage projects. That is not Athens, it's not the whole project that we're looking at over there. I don't know what those are going to cost. We have a report that's supposed to be presented to us pretty soon. We can wait until we get that report and see what that is, and then you'll have to decide which one you want to do. But the thing that I want us to think about, and that I'm really concerned about, is Garcia Creek. 20 plus years ago, we made, as a city, some pretty significant investments in those areas, and every one of those investments is at this stage right now being undermined, and they need to be maintained.
Garcia Creek.
Yeah, is it Garcia?
The bridge, Garza Creek, the bridge into River Bluff on Geneva Street.
Yeah, so it's that bridge. The bridge is being undercut and eroded. And then there's outfalls at two different locations along that creek that are also being undercut. You got floating concrete, which is never good. So we're going to lose those investments entirely if we don't do something to maintain them. Those were identified in the drainage report that you received, and they're on the lower end of costs. The most expensive one, I want to say, is doing abutments and a bunch of other things to that bridge. So if you recall, if you drive that area, you'll see the road, the yards that are just east of the bridge are eroding significantly. And so what you'd have to do is build a new kind of abutment, might be the wrong term, but erosion control device of some kind, in addition to making any repairs under the bridge that might be needed. And then down heading further east down the creek, we need to go do whatever you need to do to shore up those outfall locations. In my mind, that's where you want to, I would suggest you want to spend your money first, because you don't want to lose the investment that was made 20 years ago. We want to need to maintain that. And the cost of maintaining that is somewhere between $1 million and $2 million. There were estimates provided with your drainage report. We can go back and look at that later and see, or you can go back and look at it at your own time. But those estimates were, I want to say, in that range, $1 to $2 million. That's all I have to say about drainages. At some point, we need to get this report from K-Freeze, and then we need to decide how we're going to do that. And we need to do that sooner. I don't know why she listens to me. We need to do that sooner than later, because I'm really concerned that
Are
we're
there
going to.
government loan programs related to stormwater drainage like this?
Well, so possibly.
Because that'd be at a better interest rate.
Yeah, possibly. I don't know. You said loan programs. I was actually thinking grants. I don't know about loan programs, but there may be. I know the state, we participated, I mentioned this, and it really was good timing on our part. We just happened to be doing our drainage study at the same time the state said, hey, we're going to do a statewide drainage study. So we were able to participate literally hand in hand with them in that process, in the hopes that when funding came available, we'd be in a really good position. Well, no funding's come available yet. But by doing these projects, I don't think we're hurting ourselves, because we already know there are there are much larger projects that we know that we need to try to undertake that would be new. I think shoring these up, even if we have to do it 100% on our own dime, we just need to do it. But we've been working through K-Freeze to try and identify other grant or funding options for those, and I just haven't been able to find anything yet.
I just think that our approach to the drainage is a shambles. I mean, if we just keep looking at, let's just pick Athens Street. For 6 or 8 years, we've been talking about the Athens Street problem. And I think it was a year ago, K-Freeze came out and said, well, now we have 20 drainage problems that we have to fix, and Athens Street is the 6th one down, and it's $10 million. That was a year ago.
Right.
And then we let a contract to go see if we could do something in the
That's not
meantime.
10 million, yeah.
And we haven't heard yet. But I don't think we're taking the right approach to the drainage. I think we should really have drainage in the CIP. We should prioritize. Council should agree on what is the priority, put them in the CIP, and try to get them funded with bonds or whatever way is the appropriate way. But we don't seem to be able to make any progress in drainage. I mean, since 2018, I haven't seen any significant progress in any areas of drainage.
Well, that's why I'm making that comment now, because I
I would
agree.
just like to see more emphasis
So
placed on it.
there's a placeholder right now for just some drainage improvements. We could add all the items from the report, and that certainly, and actually name them, and then have them, they'd start out as unfunded, but at least they'd be listed, and it's like, here's the different drainage items, and we can try to prioritize those. That's good feedback.
You know, the one, I guess, for her to consider is, part of K-Freeze's recommendation was to reestablish the drainage, the bar ditches, and the city with their crews, and you also subcontracted somebody to open up others. But, I mean, I go down the street and I see where these bar ditches are being reestablished, and that, again, in the old part of the city, we haven't had new development that's increased the problem over the last 100 years. We're going to have problems when they develop north of 90, because that's going to come through Geneva and everything. When that happens, I'm talking about best property up there. And that's going to impact stuff south of 90. But, so we do need to look at it. But the important thing is get it back to the drainage it was 30 years ago by reestablishing bar ditches. That's one of the biggest things you can do. And you're always going to have these storms that come through, and affect everybody's property.
Overwhelm your system, yeah.
Yeah, but at least to get it where
That
it's
should
not
go into
happening every 10 years.
But that should go into O&M, and that should be coming out of that drainage fee, right?
Yeah, but it's, the bar ditches? Yeah, so some of that is. We have spent earlier you saw, we spent $140,000 on drainage, and I need to see what that's made up of, what the POs are. But you're right, some of that is being spent out of the
But just like you did last time, using that drainage fee and going leverage that for loans, bonds, and then that's what paid for 4 of those 5 projects back 15 or so years ago. So we need, again, build up that kitty. You either go spend it, I understand that, or we use that to leverage us to go out and get bonds and get more money. But we don't have enough money. The city can't afford all the drainage projects that come out. But I think I do think that we are doing some work on our drainage now, where we can, but I think when we get this K-Freeze report, then that's going
When
to help
are
us
we
make
getting
those
that? Because
decisions.
we're like months overdue on
No, we talked about it at the last council meeting. I think they're really, really close to having a public meeting. We talked about, do we want to have that at a council meeting, or do we want to have that, like, set up a public meeting? And I think the decision was, no, we want to have a public meeting, and we need it, but before the public meeting, we make sure that you and Herb, at a minimum, know what's in that report, right? You weren't here, but,
Yeah, I want to see it.
yeah, I know everybody wants to see it. So it will go to the entire council, but
Yeah.
that was the concept that was talking
So
about.
I want to back out of this really quickly. When I go through this, we've talked about streets, we've talked about the library, we've talked about the park, we've talked about drainage, the mobility study, the planning for mobility, but then there'll actually need to be mobility investments, so that'll be part of the mobility plan. We haven't talked about the airport plan, but there is an airport plan out there. And so we have all of these planning mechanisms, and it just starts to become more and more clear to me that we need to make sure that we are aligned on what those are, make sure that we have all of the CIP items here incorporated in one of these. The one thing that stands out to me is that the animal control facility is not in any of our master planning, so where does that actually fit? Is that a standalone plan? Because
Yeah, you don't have a facilities plan, and that's where you might see something like that. You might also,
So my point is.
if you had a service, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to think of it. If you had a services, like if each service area had to go through a strategic planning process where they thought about what their services look like, and I think much larger cities would do this, because they have the expertise, frankly, that professionalism that can do that. But then you'd have a services plan for each service area the city has. And one of the interesting ideas I had over the weekend was, we don't do what the state does, but I don't know why we don't. And that's like, look at sunsetting. Like, each service area should have to go through a sunsetting provision like the state does to verify with the council every so often, hey, we still think this is a worthy service, and we still think it deserves the prioritization to get, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's a healthy process. But no,
My
you're right.
point is-
That's where that
Start
might be.
planning for the next
We
5
have-
years if you keep us.
Right, but we have plans for most of these. They haven't been completely compiled. And in terms of the CIP, as we start putting them into ClearPoint, they start becoming a lot more clear. But I told you before, I want to go through our master planning every year, right around the new council time, where we're reviewing plans like this, so that we can talk about, here's the drainage plan, so we'll have that for next year. Here's the parks plan. This is what's up to date, and this is what's not up to date. And if we're not doing that, like when we.
It becomes stale.
Yeah, well, and a few years ago, we had this exercise that I don't think anybody enjoyed, and that was stick pieces of paper with numbers on a board and decide what your favorite, what your favorite project
Very
is.
positive things came from that.
Yes, exactly. So the point was something like that, while that's worthwhile, if you don't plug that into a bigger plan, and Herb brought this up, we're just kind of picking, so I think everybody brought it up.
But no, the sticker effort that we went through, though, that is what the CIP reflects. The timetable and the.
Different
items-
sticker effort.
Okay.
Yeah, no, this
Yep.
is before you.
Sorry.
So just taking a step back, so we went through the sticker exercise where we took the entire CIP and everybody put down what their pet project was. So if we put this pet project and this pet project and that pet project without prioritizing them against the plans that we have, why are we spending money on plans? Why are we taking the time and the effort, the hundreds of man hours sometimes to put these things, or people hours, excuse me, to put these things together if we're not actually following through on them? So everything that's on this CIP needs to be compared against what our plan is. And it's not like super detailed. I'm not talking about another hundreds of hours worth of work, but it's really just this alignment where we're taking this very strategically, taking a step back and saying, where does this fit into the bigger picture? So like today, I don't expect us to get to a point of resolution, but talking through some of these things and figuring out what our strategy can be, and then methodically over the next few months, go through and get it baked in and make sure that we are prioritizing and comparing one versus the next, instead of just shotgun, here's a couple $1 million, okay, we're gonna spend it, now it's all gone. And, oh, I forgot about the other priority that we overlooked. So I think that, and I keep looking back and forth to make sure that I'm tracking the right direction, but I think that that's the way that we need to take a look at the CIP. So the next time we go through the CIP, let's take the next year funding, take the 2024 funding, look at the things that have been, that are approved, and look at it in the aggregate. So at a detailed level of each project that goes into it and where that falls in the priority of that master planning, and then start looking at subsequent years and start moving this stuff around.
Yes, but.
Yes.
This is the but. It depends, you know, the reason that we didn't, an effort like that probably isn't warranted today. This is no funding. The only funding we do have is cash. And that's why I was suggesting that really only looking at projects where you have potential of matching those funds. To do that for all of it and prioritize it when you have no money is a waste of time.
Right, but if you don't have a plan and you just start spending money,
But that's what I'm
then it's a
saying.
waste
Use this, I mean, I
it's a
heard
waste
you a lot.
of money.
I understand that. I heard that, heard y'all loud and clear, and the good news is you do have a plan. You have a CIP. This CIP did go through a vetting process. There are things that are not on this CIP that aren't on there because they weren't a priority. Now, if the only way to go back to the drawing board, we literally go back to the drawing board and see the items that fell off and see if they now warrant being put back on. But the fact of the matter is you have a lot of stuff on here that's in the unfunded category. And that's where I think you would start looking, but then we need to update this, and this is where what we talked through, and what I think I agree with, is we need to add the drainage project specific, because when this was adopted, we didn't have that drainage plan. Well, now we do. To your point, now we can add the items to the drainage plan. We had a parks master plan, but it hasn't been very well vetted recently after all this stuff has been completed, and we don't have a real strong feeling that the parks board is 100% behind that. We need to add that. Airport, I see where you're coming from, but also that it is a separate funding source, and so, I don't think
airport is as important because.
But it has AWAS, there are some capital plan items that we could put on here that probably should be on here, just to, if no other reason, just to say, hey, remember, these are things that
For
are.
tracking.
We're aware of
done,
it,
yeah.
and we're tracking to it.
So
And even if we're not spending it out of, because this isn't just general fund, it's the enterprise funds as well. And so just getting that, and this is just about refining the
Yeah.
process. The direction, I'm going
Go
to
ahead.
take off here for a second. So the direction that we've been going since you put this together, and this has been a year and a half or so, almost 2 years ago that you started putting this together, I think it makes the conversation a lot easier. So every time we do one of these, it's just a point of refinement.
Agreed.
And so this was the foundation of that refinement, and I think as we go through these, we further refine it and get it to that point. Like, I don't want to have analysis paralysis here, but I also don't want to have shotgun spending.
Yeah. Well, no, I want to be clear. I'm not advocating for shotgun spending. I'm not advocating you spend $3.5 million. I want to, but I have to be respectful of the fact that it is not my decision, it's y'all's. And I want to make sure you're clear on that you all understand this is your discretion. And I will advise you, and I'll be very careful to use the words, I'm advising you to do this, I advise you to do that, but ultimately it's your decision. But I don't think, on here, what you've heard my advice today is, look at what's in your CIP, and think about those things that could be matched with the grant fund, and think about those things that not only could be matched with the grant fund, but that are a priority for you personally, or for the city. And those are decisions that really only you can make. Like, you and your constituents make those decisions, not staff, typically. Staff will tell you, we'll say, hey, we think we have this harebrained idea about a restroom trailer. That's a $35,000 trailer, right? That's not. It is a capital expense, but that's not a big deal, right?
That was a $70,000.
70, whatever, yeah. Sorry, 70. Well,
70,000,
so
35,000.
5-year payback, probably. Anyway, okay. That's all I have.
So I think that what we need to do for the next step is to go through, what we don't have is kind of a consolidated view of the next year, because we're talking about the next year. we don't have a consolidated view of the next year. So I think that
What do you mean by consolidated view?
a consolidated view of what all we have approved.
For 2024 in spending? Well, what I was telling, what I can do, I have to think about what the view of this would change, but that's what this attempt was, in telling you, and again, absent ClearPoint, because ClearPoint really will have the detail that you need, and I know that's like November 15th, like it's around the corner, so I didn't want to, like, I think you're going to be able to get the consolidated view you want for next year, because keep in mind, I told you, essentially, all of your bond funds
What
are
I'm talking,
committed.
I'll work
Okay.
with you offline on this. If we'll figure out the unfunded things. This is all the stuff that's funded, right?
Oh, yeah.
This presentation right here is all the stuff
Yeah.
that's funded, right?
That's all bonded, bond fund, yes.
Right. So what we're talking about for next year, kind of the purpose of this workshop is to get an update on where we are from the previous year's spending, and then look forward for what we want to prioritize specifically for the next year. So I think that if you and I can spend a couple of minutes going through and putting a consolidated view of the potential ones, we can do some.
That are grant funded, right? I mean, because it wouldn't, if they require.
You're saying it right now, it is, and if I'm speaking out of turn and you let me know, please speak up. I don't feel like I've got enough information in a consolidated form. Like this, to me, just taking the spreadsheet even, I can't look at it and sort it out and say, okay, so these are the things that we need to be looking at, because I don't have a full consolidated list of them.
Here's what I got out of today's meeting, and you said it right up front. We don't have any money this year, for this coming year.
Makes it easy, right?
So we're not going to spend a lot of money because we don't have a lot of money. What I don't have now going out of this room tonight is, what are we going to do with the little bit of money we have? What's the 3 or 4 most important things we're going to do this coming year? So when somebody comes up to me from my district and says, what did you guys do in the CIP last night? Well, we made a decision about these things that we're going to do this year. We don't have a lot of money this year, but this is what we're going to do with the money we have in this coming year. And here's our priorities. I still don't see those.
Yeah, I don't think we should do that tonight, though.
No, we can't now. It's too late.
But I think in the very near future, we're gonna get a lot of information that's gonna help us. One of those being what's happening with this Granite Park. One of it's gonna be is the K-freeze.
Drainage plan.
And then.
Yeah, streets.
Yes, with the drainage plan. I don't see us doing a lot, but I don't have.
You're going to get the library report too. So you can get
You
3
can
main
get
things that are going to really
library
help you kind of understand how much the cost is and what the priority is.
Well, but even with the library, so right now you say we're looking at the library, but where's the justification for the need?
That's part of that report.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. See, maybe the library is not where we want to spend all that money.
Right.
Maybe we want to phase that out into.
Right.
Spread it out a little bit and do the most important thing.
But what are those phases?
But
How much they cost? What's
This is a
justification?
great
That's all later. I don't have it
framework
today.
that the staff has given us, and I don't mean to belittle it at all.
Yeah.
This is good information, it's easy to understand, but I think we have more work to do in order to firm up our vision for 2024 in terms of capital.
I think this has been a good education, but it's not actionable yet, and that's okay.
And a part of it's just timing of information, man. So, anything else?
One thing on streets, you guys need to all go drive through the Hennis, Texas. And our streets, every street in Castroville is leaps and bounds above what the Hennis have.
Go drive through Houston.
You know, through Houston, but you know, we have these very slow speed limits here, and the reason is that we don't have great streets. Our streets are not gonna fail to where they're impassable in any kind of inclement weather, except for floods. They're usable, so we don't have to replace all the streets right away. I do think you do need to have an orderly plan, which we do, and if we have to slow that down a little bit until, you know, the economy catches back up with it, but.
And utilities catch up with it.
And utilities catch up with it, because that's a smart thing to do. But we don't, and again, we all remember the story of Tim Kelly. He went and chip sealed streets that you know, it was a waste of money. We don't want to do that. We want to be smart about what we do. But it's not an emergency type thing, and I think we can spread that out. But remind people, that's why we have 25-mile-an-hour speed limits, is the condition of our streets. And they're not wide, and we don't have sidewalks, and so we need to remind everybody, hey, this,
Well,
25-mile-an-hour speed limits.
The other thing that really gives some serious consideration to is your streets program itself. Right now, you have a streets department of 2 people? 3 people? 3 people. Yeah. It's usually a supervisor and 2 helpers. That's the way most of our departments are. You have 3 people and very limited equipment. They do have, I mean, y'all have invested in some equipment, but that, it's just limited, right? And that may be, I mean, this is a question you have to ponder. Is that the appropriate amount? Do we have more or less than we want, right? Are we satisfied with the level of work that we're able to do? If you had more people, you'd be able to stay on top of drainage more, you'd be able to stay on top of the right-of-way maintenance more, and you'd be able to do more repair than you're doing today. And if you had a more robust budget, of course, you could do all those things even more, right? But that's, I mean, that's really, it's scalable. And the question is, the scale you have right now, you could also literally say, you know what, we don't have a streets department, don't need one, because anytime we need streets, we're just gonna hire it done. I'm not recommending that, right? But the point is, it's a spectrum. And one of the things y'all need to think about for each of your service areas is, do we have the service area that we want for that item? And I'm only bringing it up because we're talking about streets right now, but that's something that I contemplate often, especially when I receive complaints, either from you all or from the public, either one. I think about, okay, you know, the mayor gets tired of me saying this, but, you know, I say, well, it's a resource issue. It's a resource allocation issue ultimately. Do we have enough resources? Are we allocating enough resources in terms of people and machinery and time to whatever it is? And have we set proper expectations? And I think that's what you're getting at, Phil, with our public about, like, you're saying, I mean, what I hear you say is, guys, go drive to Hannah's. It's not that bad. You know, but some people, their expectation is they've moved from San Antonio and they want, you know, or some other area. And they want really nice streets
If
everywhere.
they lived in a newer subdivision that hadn't gone through the failure.
Right.
But if they go through the areas of town that are as old as we are, you're gonna see very similar streets.
As we grow, it'll be interesting, because certainly people that come from, and the other thing is, as we invite people here, tourists and others, we do need to think about, okay, what's the product we're putting out in front of people? And, you know, what does that look like? Food for thought.
150-year-old homes, 170-year-old homes, you know, 50-year-old streets aren't bad. So, anyway.
Okay, what else do we have today?
That's all I have, folks. I
Okay.
appreciate your patience, and again, I felt a little bad because we didn't have a lot, but Herb, you summarized it perfectly.
It's good progress. Thank you for scheduling this,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll figure out when the next one's gonna be, and we'll move it forward. If there's anything that isn't here, this is to council, kind of broad level. I know that you have commented on, like, emergency preparation, and there's some other things that aren't in here. Let's make sure that we get them in here, even if we have to put them out on subsequent years. Let's make sure that you can capture the things you feel like are important. If you've got a general idea, like if you've got experience with this and have a general idea of how much it costs, that's just like.
Yeah, emergency management's on the CIP. We didn't do anything with it, but it's there.
That's mostly because of your urging, like, you want to have emergency management. We
Yeah.
don't have, there's not a lot of assets that we have presently, and we don't have a plan for those assets.
And that's just it. We gotta get a plan established and then building up our resources. I mean, Chief's well aware of that too. Because, I mean, we already had a fire close when it was out at the lake, and we had to enact something. I mean, Snowmageddon could happen again.
Another 576 years.
Oh, no, let's not go there. Let's be reality
Or this
now.
winter, you never know.
That's right.
Wasn't it was 86 degrees yesterday and 40 degrees today?
Yep.
Yep. You guys, anything else? Have we missed? Okay, cool. Thanks for the time. We're going to adjourn then at 5:34.
Thank you.
Someone asked me over my Michelada last night at the restaurant. They mentioned that